everybody. Okay, welcome to the Ten-Four Tavern. It is Tuesday, April 14th, the year of our Lord, 2026, 7:06. We're only less than a minute behind. Sorry for the technical difficulties, but we got in. We activated while it was still 7:05, so it's really not late. So, but Nolan was standing by. Nolan, appreciate that. Terry Manning, good evening. Lily, good evening. Everybody, check it out. We got Paul Eckloff, former Secret Service, ASAC, presidential detail, and a whole bunch of other really cool stuff. He's drinking. We'll bring up the menu in a second. And then he transitioned from the Secret Service into the private sector, and he is one of the leading thought leaders and more advanced people as it relates to government fraud, waste, and abuse, government programs. We're going to get deep into that later. We have a great story on how Paul became a U.S. Secret Service agent, all his work there, and then how he transitioned into career and all the cool things in his life besides that. Paul, welcome to the Ten-Four Tavern.
It is incredible honor to be here. I feel like, though, this is a bit like the comic relief episode in the middle of the series. The men and women that you have on this show that stood the line, wore the uniform, and did amazing things. And then I'm like Joe Pesci on Lethal Weapon in the middle, or whatever the opposite was of like Batman on Scooby-Doo, like whatever the flip of that is. So maybe I'm the edutainment in between. But yes, my life has been a 3-decade cry for help, and done a million different things. And yeah, the Clint that I'm sipping is a story in itself, but it really is great to be here.
So let's do that. So Pete is everybody. So just so you know, Pete is MIA. He took he asked for an excuse. He's got a 28, and yeah, I do let the high and tight and a tan. I was on a Caribbean cruise. We'll get into that in a bit, but yeah.
Me too. I did my hair for this, Tommy.
Did you? See, I asked for the cut. I asked for the Eckloff cut, and the wife denied that. So, yeah, Pete is doing his FLIOLA, Federal Law Enforcement Officers Association, which you're a member of, Paul.
Indeed.
He's doing his part in his volunteer work afterwards, and it is a big thing. It's a big part of his life. He's a firm advocate for federal law enforcement officers. So, although he's missing the tavern tonight, I'm sure he'll watch it on the replay, and we miss him tonight. So, Pete, shout out to you, brother. We miss you. Love you. But I'm going to fly solo tonight. I couldn't get a person that I thought could blend in, Paul. I wanted to have the conversation because I'm going to give you the floor like 97% of the time.
No, that's a mistake. Big mistake. Yeah, no, don't do that. Nobody's ever done that and did not regret it.
So Pete is probably drinking an Espolon Reposado tequila because that's what he normally drinks. So there's a question mark there. I've got a mid-shelf Pinot Noir that I just had a pork loin dinner with my wife before I came up here, and I just carried that up for the rest of the night. And if I have to dip deep in, I'm going to go respond to bourbon later, former previous guest. But you're drinking a Clint. Talk about the Clint, and then we'll talk about your beer stuff.
Yeah, let's not judge. I do have a cooler of my beer down here. The Clint, let me give it a nice sip. Whew. The Clint is, I just learned about it last April, and it's a fascinating story in itself. A year ago, we lost one of the last great legends of the Secret Service and law enforcement, Clint Hill. Clint Hill, for those who don't remember or study assassinations, was the agent riding in the follow-up in 1963, and he was Jackie Kennedy's agent. He saw her crawling onto the trunk of the limo at Dealey Plaza. He ran towards what he thought was gunfire and jumped onto the running boards, almost being run over twice, and was able to get her back in the car and lay on top of her. I didn't learn about this drink until his funeral at the National Cathedral last year. Mike Rowe, I mean, just one of my favorite celebrities. He's the Dirty Jobs guy.
Dirty Jobs.
He was giving the eulogy because they became great friends. He went into a bar to get a drink, and there was an older gentleman that he said kind of reminded him of his father, who sat down and ordered a Clint. And the bartender, of course, looked at him. He handed him a business card that had the name, the picture, and how to make it. And he said, any man that carries a business card of a drink named after him has got to be interesting. At the time, he'd had no idea who he was in history. It's as enigmatic as the man that we all looked up of. He was the right man at the right time. I know he struggled with it. And I got to meet him several times throughout my career and time on the president's detail. It is 2 shots of Campari, 1 shot of vodka, soda water, ice, and an orange slice. It is not my favorite drink. I'm not gonna lie. Wanted to make it in commemoration to Clint.
Well, I think it's more important that
But-
we honor Clint than you enjoy your drink.
I'm honoring Clint by suffering through this. He really was a humble man who even through his own struggles, continued to give SAC of the President's Detail, led the training center, and led the agency for many years after that tragedy in 1963. And we lost him last year, and we all miss him dearly.
Yeah, well, condolences to him and his family, and may he rest in peace, and thank him for his service to the country in protecting presidents and all dignitaries. So we'll talk about that. We'll get into that. And I'm sure a lot of NYPD guys will talk about the dignitary detail. And I think you give a lot of acknowledgement to some locals as well, and how that needs to be a collaborative effort. And we'll definitely get into that. But before we do, I got to ask, how do you go from teaching biology to protecting presidents and all the other crazy jobs in the middle? How does that happen? Paul,
I laugh because
where'd you grow up? How were you raised? And then what's that journey look like?
I grew up as a Navy brat. My father was a 2-time Vietnam veteran. We lived all over the country and all over the world as a child. And I had my life stream, as you see how it's played out. I was going to be the next Jacques Cousteau. I was going to be a marine biologist. I was going to save the sharks and the coral reefs. And I had a mullet. And just for any listeners or watchers who want to know what God does to mullets, he goes, you want hair on your back? That's the only place you can now grow it. And so any of you who have a nice head of hair who abuse it, just know that a reckoning is coming. But I was studying marine biology at the University of Miami, which I'll acknowledge, go Canes. And I realized that if I wanted to study marine biology, in order to live and have a family, I'd have to eat the fish I was studying, because there's no money. You're going to study sponges or something not so exciting. Though I did teach some courses, and I lived in Hawaii at the time while going to school in Miami. Long story short, I got a job teaching high school. I went into science teaching. I taught high school in Liberty City, Miami for a year and did my student teaching there, and then moved up to Georgia and taught in Walton County, Georgia, where I taught biology. Forensic science was a course that I actually started. I found some of the science we were teaching these middle kids, they maybe weren't going to be college students. They weren't going to be, or they were going to be a middle 50, like the average American. How do you get them interested in science? And I found criminology and criminalistics the way to do that. We would do all sorts of bloodstain pattern analysis, fingerprint analysis, how to solve murders. And I only had to stay one chapter ahead of them. But as I was studying it, federal law enforcement or forensic science interested me. And I applied for the FBI, and maybe rightly, they denied me real quick. They were like, nah, no thanks. The service said, hey, kid, this was in 96. We got the Olympics to deal with. You're a high school teacher. We're not sure. Well, they said, well, why don't you come take our test? Well, I'm a huge nerd. Anybody that knows me, I proudly know that nerds will inherit the earth. I crushed their test. They were like, you got to come in. And I immediately just clicked with these people. At the time, I was teaching high school, teaching taekwondo, and ran a homebrew store, Brewtopia, home beer and winemaking supply. We taught people how to make beer, how to make wine, and we traveled around doing beer talks. I went into this panel interview, and this crusty old agent, he walks in and he's looking under the table. I don't know how salty a language we can get here in the tavern, but
you can, as long as we don't go overboard, a couple of F-bombs and a couple appropriate swear words work perfectly for storytelling, but YouTube will suppress us if we're too offensive.
No, then we'll just the dirtiest word I'll use is rascal. Well, this guy, he's looking around and I'm like, sir, and he's like, what's going on here? You have no shot. And I'm terrified. This is the Secret Service. I'm a high school teacher. I'm thinking maybe I could fight my way out, but I don't know. And he goes, you have a beer store. I go, well, yes, sir. He goes, well, where's the bleeping cooler? And I knew from that moment, this was a group of people that I was going to get along famously with. And 23 years.
What I'm hearing is high school kids prepared you for world leaders. That's what I'm hearing.
High school kids prepared me for world leaders. They prepared me for how to defend myself, a way to think, and honestly, diplomacy. And to get a kid in inner city Miami to give a care at all about the Krebs cycle or photosynthesis, you got to be engaging, you got to be funny, you got to be diplomatic, you got to find ways to reach people. That translates so well into law enforcement that it's uncanny. I just found that diplomacy. So the service doesn't hire the best shooter, the best fighter, the best protector or investigator, because you can teach a lot of that. Sure. It's the diplomacy, the communications, and the interpersonal human skills that are sort of the intangibles that they look for. And then in some cases, they make mistakes, like hiring me.
Well, I'm not so sure about that. But so you get on, like, how much after this interview did you get on the job? Like, he's telling you, where's the cooler? How much longer did it take for you to get on the job?
Well, that was a panel interview that took me 4 months to get scheduled for the test. It took a number of other things to get another 4 months to get to the panel interview. And then it was another 12 months before I started on the job. It was an 18-month process at the time because the Secret Service, although some of the things you hear in the news make you wonder, they do something called a full scope background investigation with a lifestyle poly. They don't just check whether you knew national security secrets and fumbled them. They go back and check your patriotism and your behavior to when you were 8 years old. If you were running around the neighborhood like a real rascal, your neighbors are going to remember. They pull threads because they give you the highest of clearances. It's not always because what you're going to know, though. Obviously, I learned a number of things through my time. It's what you're going to be around. You're going to be in the room that happened. And I'm not sure where the book is, but I'm literally in the book called The Room Where It Happened with Ambassador Bolton. There's a picture of us. We did an around the world trip. But
Paul, what year did you get on?
I started.
It's a great question. So
applied in 96, and I started in March of 1998. And they sent me to the Dallas field office. And I actually reported on April Fool's Day to training.
It's also not a coincidence, right?
Yeah.
Okay, so good. So walk us through. So everyone sees the suits and sunglasses. What don't we know? Pressure versus boredom, right? We see it as cops, right? They told us in the academy 95% is boredom, but 5% is sheer terror. The planning versus the chaos, the oh shit moments. What's like?
Well, that's exactly.
How did you walk your way through the Secret Service and then get yourself up to the presidential detail?
Well, that's exactly right. And it's interesting because that's what we say too. Being in the Secret Service is 23 hours and 59 minutes of sheer boredom and 1 minute of abject terror.
I say the same thing about raising kids. 23 hours and 59 minutes of shit and 1 minute of joy, and it's worth it all.
It'll be it'll be the greatest thing you ever do. Like, why? You're dealing with like one going into college and one who's quite gainfully employed, who's now my beer buddy and helps me brew. So that's the only reason I had kids was to brew. The second one, we kind of originally had just to harvest organs in case there was a problem with the first, but I don't tell them. I kind of like the second one better. So,
hey, they used to do it just to help on the farm, right? So they needed more help on the farm. They had more kids. So I mean, harvesting organs, that's not. It's not a
heir and a spare. I'm not royalty, but hey, the concept works. What people don't know with the Secret Service is, I mean, it's glasses, it's sunglasses and earpieces, and that's fine. But when you start in the service, you don't start with protection. Every agent goes to FLETC down in Glencoe, and hopefully doesn't have a Glencoe romance, a FLETC romance, and you become a criminal investigator and you investigate financial crimes. The Secret Service started in 1865 to suppress counterfeit currency. And they were in their first year, counterfeit went from 1/3 to 1/2 of all money in circulation to within a year and a half or so, 1/10 of 1%, where it remains today. And they were able to shore up confidence in the early United States banking system and federalism. But you do this investigations. You used to go to the check squad because treasury checks used to be a thing. People would counterfeit them or steal them. And that's largely gone away. But then I spent the majority of my time in the counterfeit squad, where we literally investigated counterfeit currency, where I was chasing counterfeiters and tracking the money all over the world and locally where you'd find these people. And I thought I did go undercover a few times, but it was fun. I remember asking a legendary ASAC, who was a former Navy SEAL in Vietnam and a known rascal. I told him I wanted to go undercover. He looks at me, takes out his dip and like he throws it in my trash. The only thing you're going to ever do uncover is a GD banker. Like, cause I was like, thank you, sir. And back to work. And then but during your time, you do post standing. If the president's going to say, like my first foreign trip was to Malaysia, 54 hours on a C5 cargo jet with the limousines flying overseas, 10 stops to Kuala Lumpur. And then you have the post standers. Like if there's a door or a dumpster that needs guarding or a roof access or a post, those post standers from around the country come in and stand that. And then the shift that travels with the president, the people on the president detail form that inner perimeter. So you sort of act as the middle. You're partnered with local law enforcement. There's outer perimeter as well with local and state law enforcement. And you do that. That same sort of mission model works throughout the world. And then most people aspire to protect, everybody goes to protection between 4 and 8 years after you start. Some people choose to stay in investigations. I don't quite get it. I don't want to cast aspersions, but you joined the Secret Service. And if you're telling me that there was a computer and a stolen credit card was what was in your dream at the time, great. But the Secret Service to me was protection. And I'm a glutton for punishment. So I did it sort of relatively unprecedented, though there are a lot of people who got a lot further than me. But I did 5 times on the president's detail over 14 years.
Yeah, and we'll get into that for sure, because I have some pictures of you. And just for the audience, we're not going to talk about tradecraft. We're not going to talk about that, but like what it's like, the burden on the strain on the agent, and what it's like logistics, what it's like for the home life and the travel and all the things that come with that. And then, I couldn't think of a bigger honor than to guard the president of the United States of America. So achieving that level, certainly I respect it. You and I have talked offline 100 times about it. We have mutual friends who've worked with you on presidential details or in the same service with other presidential details. I've always picked their brains on the side, thinking, how cool is that? How interesting. And the idea of being able to and committing to jumping in front of a bullet like we've seen agents do. Yeah, I mean, it's like, just like up there is the unknown soldier, right? With like, they look at that as the ultimate like service, like, and so protecting the president of the United States of America, the single most powerful person on the planet, and our leader, no matter who he is, no matter what side it is, and we're not playing politics. We don't do that here. We talk about the people who serve law enforcement, whatever their sides are. I mean, it's just great. But you did talk, and I mentioned it before, about the federal partnerships with local law enforcement, and you don't always hear that from the feds. So whether it's counterfeiting and those kinds of cases and credit cards and all those things, all the way up to protection. What does that look like? Why do you feel so strongly? Because you made a point to share that with me before the show tonight. Why that is such a critical part of the Secret Service.
Well, the Secret Service doesn't succeed without it. The Secret Service, if anything, they're the masters of. And while I say they're the best in the world at protection, they're the best in the world at partnerships. They're a very small agency. You can look at, how many officers are in the amazing NYPD? How many officers in one city?
Reported or actual? So
let's start with what they want the public to think.
They're reporting 35. We're thinking somewhere around 30 right now.
1,000, right?
35,000.
Secret Service has approximately 130 field offices around the world,
right,
with 3,400 agents to cover the world. The president's detail, I'm not going to give numbers, but when you think of the footprint and seeing the agents everywhere, it's simply the numbers aren't there. To do this job, it's always been partnerships. It's always been working with the local police. In fact, it was, the archivist will probably yell at me because I don't know the exact number, but we were probably an agency for 60 years before we had arrest powers. We would go and do all of this work. And the reason we're called the Secret Service is because we're not gentlemen, evidently. That's a funny story. But they would collar a guy and they'd have to take him to the U.S. Marshals to arrest them or to the local police. But I was what I thought was really good at a counterfeit investigator in the Dallas-Fort Worth area. But my best cases came out of Grand Prairie. And the only reason, I haven't seen him since I left, but Detective Rick Kraft, a lifelong Grand Prairie Police Department detective, really, I wouldn't say he carried me, at least not publicly, but he through the state, or not certainly with my bosses, guiding me on what to do and what to know locally, because we don't. We come from DC, we come from the field office, but we don't know the local area. For protection, it's the same way. The agent from the president, if the president's going to Dallas, the agent from DC comes down and partners with a Dallas-based agent, but then they have local police who really know the jurisdiction. Their intelligence, I mean, the protective intelligence in NYPD is second to none, although my heart is kind of with the MPDC in DC, because we'll talk about my great-great-grandfather helped found it. But these major city police, what they deal with day in and day out, and the Secret Service is able to get on the news and operate inside this secure bubble, like the UN. I don't believe it could happen. I mean, it could happen in DC, but it couldn't happen with the precision and the timing and sort of the, whatever, forget about it, like the UN does in New York City because of the NYPD. Bringing 150 presidents or prime ministers, heads of state or heads of government with their own security details and issues and that logistics is beyond me. You have to do logistics to sort of elevate in the Secret Service. And I equated it to watching a family member with cancer, which I've had. It's brutal. I did mine in Rome with the president, went through the Vatican and in Rome and other areas of Italy. All of those moving parts, whether they're the local police, and the Secret Service has to work hand in hand with the White House Military Office, the White House Communications Agency, the three-letter agencies. All sorts of things have to work just right. And that local piece is honestly is where all of that security touches the ground. And without it, it simply isn't happening. And we, anyone who can't acknowledge that is suffering from an abuse of hubris, as I like to say.
Sure.
Ego, which,
and it's funny because we have mutual friends in Mike Breslin and Mike Hartenstein who work for a company, and there was a bike run, and they ran this big bike run, and they were appropriately tasked to run the logistics of making sure that they worked with the local police department to make sure that the bike run trail is all worked out, and then the borders and the barriers and all the the cutting off of intersections, and to watch two seasoned Secret Service agents run a bike run like the presidential detail was hilarious.
I was on the trip, and we should first acknowledge, I want to toast Mike Hartenstein and Mike Breslin, two far greater gentlemen than I'll ever be.
Hartenstein maybe, Breslin not so much.
Yeah, Breslin's probably more like me. There's some saltiness.
No, I mean it's the other way around.
No. Hartenstein, come on, heart of gold. That guy, he's one of these people that's he's there's a body somewhere because he's so kind and generous that there's got to be something you're not seeing.
Well, thank God he's kind and generous because he's a big man. He's a very big man who I would not want to piss off.
He's a big guy. Yeah, I'm 5'8" on a tall day. Like if the barometric pressure is low, I'm just getting wider in my old age. But yeah, to see them do the logistics for this was a 300-mile bike run that our boss wanted to do from Maine to Fenway Park to raise money for the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children. And we raised darn near $1 million doing it. The logistics.
Shout out to the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children. Thank you for everything you do there. And kudos to the company. Again, we're not promoting the company, but if you want to know who it is, we'll tell you offline. But good for them for raising $1 million.
To see the advanced work that they did, because you can't half-ass that kind of work. It's just too many moving parts. And I was on that trip and just watching those two in action on that, and being kind of a PR guy, I get to just sort of capture it and take pictures. So that's fun. But yeah, going from teaching to protection to intelligence to private sector, it has been an interesting journey to see how the Secret Service, those skills translate across that journey. It's been a little crazy.
So before we do the presidential details, and we'll talk about those, and to whatever you're comfortable and whatever is appropriate to share, let's talk about your great-great-grandfather and Washington, D.C. in the formation and President James A. Garfield.
That is a crazy story, because if anybody likes historical sort of recreations, there was a book called Destiny of the Republic, sort of written about this Garfield and his assassination. And then on Netflix, there was a show, Death by Lightning, a 4-part series about this. because Charles Guiteau and the assassin of Garfield in 1881 was a crazy story. But I grew up in a military family. They were always connected to the Navy and government service. But there was rumor of a famous gun somewhere in the family that there was this famous gun. We had no idea what it was. So that just sort of in the back of your mind. I was doing genealogy and research when I was instructor at FLETC, and I discovered my great-great-grandfather with the really unfortunate name of Adolphus. We've retired that in our family. We stick to things like James and Paul. Adolphus Eckloff his father came from Prussia in 1817 to DC, and they were tailors at the Capitol and at the White House for presidents. They would make things, and then Adolphus Eckloff went into the Civil War. He was in the Union side, Nally's Rifles at the Army of the Potomac, and then he mustered out, and he heard as a resident of DC that they wanted to form a police force. So he had his friends and neighbors write a letter, and I've got copies of all these like PDFs that he wanted to, and he was one of the first roundsmen in 1861 when that NPDC was founded. He stayed in that so long that he was Lieutenant Eckloff in a steamy summer of 1881 when Charles Guiteau decided, because he was a threat to the country and he was a supporter of Chester Arthur and other people, he was going to kill President Garfield. So he hid in the ladies' room in the train station, stepped out, shot President Garfield. Officer Tierney of the Metropolitan Police Force grabbed Guiteau and took him to the police station, where sitting at the desk is Lieutenant Eckloff. And it's funny because you talk about bad language. He brings this rascal in and he goes, "This man just shot the president." And my great-great-grandfather says, "You are giving us taffy, sir." It's documented in the book. I guess taffy was the 1881 term for you're full of it.
Right.
Reached in his pockets, found the gun that killed him and his letters, and took him, commandeered a carriage and took him down to the jail, where the jailer recognized him because he had gone there the day before to see where he would be staying after he killed the president. And he bought the gun to be in a museum. But it's kind of fascinating that he was involved. He testified at trial as to the custody of the weapon and the identifying of the weapon. And it ended up in a family sock drawer. A priceless gun that killed a president was in a family sock drawer until the 1970s. And it was donated to the Metropolitan Police Force Museum that was subsequently robbed. That gun is the one assassination gun that history has no idea where it is. Now, he was a bit of a rascal. He had a lot of, let's say, disciplinary issues for losing his temper with people that he would collar. A streetcar run over a child and the person just keep going. He would break up fights, and he was a mess. I have his medical records. But what's interesting was every officer in DC was fired in 1883 for being corrupt. He sued. He sued and got his job back because he was not. He continued to work until 1906, 1861 to 1906. He was an officer. He was the head detective. But when he retired, they only gave him his short retirement. They didn't give him his first 25 years. So he sued, and the Supreme Court, the U.S. Supreme Court precedent for DC being able to fire you for any reason is Eckloff versus the District of Columbia.
Man, that's quite a history, brother. That's quite a history.
If you just, doesn't matter what you do, they can fire you. Supreme Court said, "Yep, man, because of Eckloff, get him out of here." But it's I don't consider it a legacy. We've been involved in others. I had an aunt who witnessed the Truman assassination attempt. You know, my grandfather painted a picture of Kennedy that's in the Kennedy Library after Kennedy was assassinated. It's always been a connection to service and to the government. And you know, I was a high school teacher and a bit of a.
So those things might not be intentional, Paul, but do you think there's like a thing happening? Because we joked on social media in the promos for this about you were born into this because of the connection to Garfield. But like, you have these other stories. That's not like, I don't believe in coincidences. And then I do believe in spiritual things and stuff. Like, there's just a thing that happened. And it's fun to believe it. And it doesn't matter if it's real or not. But like, all of those connections to your family and the service record and the connections to the president, and then you end up in the Secret Service actually guarding the presidents.
It is interesting because you look at these coincidences that happen and these stories. I was working as the supervisor of access control for the White House one day, and I like consider myself the mayor. I'm going around looking at the tours, talking to the people. I go into the chief usher, who was just wonderful. She was just the kindest lady ever, Angela Reed, and she says, "Do you know where the Garfield portrait is? Because the president's portraits are all over."
Portraits, yeah.
As an agent who's on the detail, intimately where Garfield's portrait is. I don't want to give any secrets, but he's at the top of the main staircase that no one ever goes up. The main staircase of the White House, he's at the top on the left, scowling at you as you're sitting or standing on midnight post. He's just, he's just staring at you. And I said, well, yeah, sure. Why? He goes, because I have the great-great-granddaughter of President Garfield here, and she'd like to see it with her family. And I went, what? So I get her to the top of the stairs, and I'm showing her. I take her off the tour and walk her up to show her this painting, and it's fascinating. And I tell her that the connection, my great-great-grandfather arrested the assassin of her great-great-grandfather. I only wish he'd been there sooner. And it was interesting, the look on her face. Obviously, these two people connected through time and history are separated. It's kind of fascinating because at the same time, my uncle, Randolph Eckloff, was the carpenter at the White House. Whenever Garfield had a problem, he'd yell, "Send for Eckloff," and he'd come and fix something. He built the orangeries, the greenhouses, and eventually was the head carpenter at the Capitol, where he built the catafalque that the caskets sit on when presidents lay in state. He built that. So you said this thread through time and history, is it coincidence? Is it? I don't know.
It's fun to believe it's all connected.
I
like
to
that
say,
stuff.
As I'm a third
what
through
part
my
is it you believe in? Well,
as I'm a third through my Clint, I'm enjoying it more now. I take back everything I said before. It's quite crisp and refreshing.
Well, that's it. You're drinking it because it tastes awful, like you said, but you're drinking it. You're just maintaining the legacy. Something else is going to happen. You know what I mean? So, Stephen S.S. Tiger, historically fascinating. Providence. So thanks for the comment. Great fan to the
Thank you.
Finest Unfiltered podcast, all three of them. So appreciate you, Stevens SS Tiger, coming on and making comments. Detective Nolan asking, you mentioned the Navy before. What is all the connections? I know you said your father was a Vietnam veteran and Navy. Any other connections just to fill in? Because we have a lot of service members who like to hear the connections and the stories, and then we're going to get into the presidential detail.
Absolutely. My father was a CB. He was a civil engineer in Vietnam with MCB-7 and worked with the Marine Corps in Phu Bai and Da Nang. His father was a draftsman and quasi-architect, though he didn't have formal schooling, for the Navy's Department of Yards and Docks. He was one of the architects who designed the Arizona Memorial. And we have family going back and, throughout wars and back to Miles Standish on the Mayflower. But my brother was a United States Navy test pilot. He was a P-3 pilot in Desert Storm doing sub chasing, and then they sent him off to get his master's in aerospace, and he flew a lot of crazy stuff. He actually checked out thank you, Stephen. Thank you. I appreciate it, brother. He checked out an F-5 and flew down to my first beer festival in Georgia as a Navy test pilot. And at the time, I was a teacher. I thought my time had passed to serve. And I look back and I really wish I had joined the military. But when I realized I couldn't, the service was the natural way to do that. And so I went that route instead.
Yeah. Okay. Before we get into the presidential details, which I think are going to be really fascinating and interesting, and it's kind of cool, but obviously extremely serious. We are going to talk about fraud later, and government fraud and the fraud, waste, and abuse, and what I think is the next thing that should be added to that. It's not just fraud, waste, and abuse anymore. I think there's corruption, because I think what we're seeing now is politicians are actually ensuring that some of that. So I'd love to hear your opinion on it. You and I have never talked about this despite our connection. But I just think that what I'm seeing in the media, so you have the opportunity to say that's true or not true, is like, I think they're either turning a blind eye or they're complicit. Maybe they're not. I don't know.
And I obviously, we'll
get into that.
Yeah, you're 100% right.
I want to talk about beer first.
It's more than that. Beer? What? Is this the quiz? I thought you called me a sissy.
You're getting a quiz.
Did you call
Tell
me a
everybody, are you a cicerone, or did you just
No, I don't even know what
that was a thing.
I'm a sissy. I don't even know what that word means. I'm a home brewer.
So everyone, so this is the tavern, so we're going to do a little cocktailing and alcoholic beverage conversation. So everyone knows what a wine sommelier is. A wine sommelier is a wine expert. And if you've ever want to see a documentary on what it takes to become a sommelier, it is an intense thing. I think there's about 400 or 500 true sommeliers in the world. Some are better than others. Some are more advanced than others. But it is a minimum standard that is a monster undertaking to become. So the beer aficionados felt slighted, and they created the Cicerone. And I knew when you told me your time frame that you were not a Cicerone. However, I'm going to call you a de facto Cicerone, because if you say you went through this journey, I'm going to test you as if you were a Cicerone. But I think it's within the last decade that the Cicerone. So anybody who wants to get into it, and they can feel it on the chat, because I don't have Pete to carry the conversation, so I can't do some production stuff.
I would say
but a Cicerone goes through the same testing that I doubt it's as intense, but the similar kind of testing.
I will tell you what we say as beer judges is that wine judges spit, but beer judges swallow. So it's because
this is a family episode, Paul.
I'm talking beer. In vino veritas, in caravicchio felicitas. In beer, in wine there is truth, but in beer there is joy and happiness.
That's right.
I'm not a beer snob, so I'm not a Cicerone. I am a recognized beer judge. Like people ask me, well, what's your favorite beer? I go, a free one, of course. But when I do purchase beer, I do tend to drink.
All right, so here's the kind of chat we want. I thought these two were more 40-ounce Old English types. That's what we're talking about.
40. I mean, come on.
It's not even beer. It's malt liquor.
And just if I'm going to pass this test, it's Old English 800.
OE8.
Mickey's
right, so
Big Mouth.
Here's the first question.
Do I need a beer? I think I need to crack a beer.
And a lager.
You know what? I'm going to crack a beer for the beer question first.
I'm going to refill my glass.
And my Batman opener is failing me.
So what are you pouring right now?
A really heavily overcarbonated homemade beer. This is Frosty's Bane, a spiced Christmas ale that my son and I made this fall. It is like a liquid, very alcoholic mom's fruitcake.
What's the ABV on that?
Yeah, it's 6.7.
For all the kids watching
the show. It was family show. Yeah, I don't. I'm a home brewer that is more relaxed. I don't test it. I don't use a spectrometer.
Okay.
It's probably relatively low. It's a delicious.
But 6.7 is nice. That's nice. Schlante, Stephen S.
Oh, so, man. That aged so well.
Tell everyone what's the difference between an ale and a lager.
An ale and a lager?
Yeah.
I thought there were going to be tough questions. Well, for one, it's the species of yeast, but we all know that the underpinning of beer, yeast is the workhorse of a beer, and ale is a species of yeast that is top fermenting, or it flocculates at the top of the fermenting vessel, and it likes warmer temperatures, and it ferments very quickly. So in a week to 2 weeks, you can do the primary fermentation, but because they're fast and they're rushed and they're warm, they produce esters and these different things that give you delicious flavors. I tend to make ales because they are essentially easier. Lagers, which is a different species of Saccharomyces or yeast, it actually flocculates at the bottom of the fermenting vessel because it likes it cold. You ferment those, and lagering, the German word for storage, they would do it in the caves. So you ferment at 40 to 45 degrees, but it takes its time, 4 weeks or so, to slowly digest those sugars and produce carbon dioxide and alcohol, which, because they take their time, leads to crisper flavors. The average beer, a continental pilsner that the American drinks, is indeed a lager. Though there are strong, clear ales and there are dark lagers, the primary difference is the fermentation, warm versus cold, and time.
Yeah. Okay.
Did I pass?
Yeah. No. I mean, I knew as far as warmer and colder. One is. That's as far as I know.
Right.
So IBUs, so you hit me for ABV, which is one acronym for the volume of alcohol in it, but like International Bitterness Units. Is that a thing? Is it overrated? Is it just a fancy thing? And explain what it is, because I like really hoppy IPAs that are massively bitter with a big bite. I like over 50, 60, 70, and I like piney, not fruity, and I like clear, not hazy.
So you like a West Coast IPA versus a
Yes.
hazy Northeastern.
And,
You
and
don't
a big fat one.
So
big bite.
A Sierra Nevada IPA would be right in your
Correct.
wheelhouse. Now,
Correct.
international bitterness units is a function of the bitterness hops, and there's alpha acids, beta acids, and other acids in the lupulus glands of the hop thing. That's the little yellow glands under the things. That's where the bitterness in beer comes from hops. Ideal in HBUs or homebrew bitterness units, because it's a simpler equation. You take the alpha acid percentage of a hop. If it's a 5% acid hop, and I use 3 ounces of it, it's 3 times 5. It's 15 HBUs. When you start getting into those international bitterness units of 50 and 60, you're getting into double IPAs, triple IPAs that are more Northeastern. But that Sierra Nevada, what a beer judge, interestingly enough, does, at least for the BJCP, is if you were to tell me that this is a spiced holiday ale, it would have a certain number in the BJCP program, and it would have a profile of what it's supposed to look, smell, taste like, and how it's supposed to be brewed, and an international style that you're mirroring. So if I enter a Budweiser type Pilsner contest and submit this, even if it's the best beer in the world, it's going to fail. Then what that judge does is they break down when they taste it where the errors were in the brewing process and how to correct them. All that to say, it's funny. It made my career very early on. That's another funny story when the crusty old agents took us for a pint on pint night, and I correctly guessed that the beer bright tank at the brewery was going to dry, was going to tap out. Like I said, we just tapped this one. I said, I'll bet you our check all night that this is going to dry up in the next 2 pitchers. And he was like, okay. First pitcher looked great. I was really getting nervous. Second pitcher, foam. The guy was so amazed just because I could taste the broken down yeast at the bottom. Now, what I will tell you is COVID stole that from me. I have not had but 25% of my smell and 50% of my taste since I lost it to COVID.
Interesting.
But I still enjoy beer because it's beer.
Yeah, that's right. So, last question. A tulip, a pint, a Weissen, the different glasses. Are they real? Is it a real thing? I mean, like I'm drinking, this is a Bordeaux glass, big bowl, right? Narrow end, keeps the aromas in. Same thing for beers. Are we doing the same things?
Absolutely. Every beer, if you go to Belgium, it's amazing because there is actually a glass for every style of beer and like brand within it. It depends on whether you want to capture those aromas. Some of them even have nucleation points. So they're the etching in the bottom so that the effervescence, the fizz is just right so that it brings out the aromas and those volatile compounds that give it a smell. Hold it, open it, a Stange for Kolsch's or a tulip glass for just like a brandy, but same thing for a higher alcohol beer or a fruit beer. No, it's absolutely a thing. Now, Does it need to be as varied as it is? No, but I would imagine the international glass cartel and syndicate would come after me if we shut it down too much. But no, there's absolutely some, just as wine and champagne, beer is far older than wine. Not to be bad on wine, but it's theorized through the University of Georgia studies that beer is the reason for civilization. So I choose to just do my part.
And I know you know it. What's Ben Franklin's quote on beer?
I don't know. He wrote a book on farting, so I'm not sure if we want to go to Ben Franklin for it. But is that
he said something to the effect? I'm not going to quote it verbatim, but there's proof there's a God that he invented beer. So
beer is proof that God loves us. Yes, but yeah, in the monks say that in heaven there is no beer, and that's why we drink it here.
That's right. So last question as it relates to, oh my God, I had a good question on the wine. Oh, wine snob. So I went to a wine tasting course in San Diego, the Wine Heretic, and you mentioned beer snob. And I want to make it clear because obviously really sophisticated, interesting conversations around beer. Now, however, I'm going to guess you agree that after mowing the lawn, sometimes you just want to bang back a Bud Light or a Corona Light and then soothe that thirst. Same thing with wine, right? You can have $100 bottle, a $300 bottle, whatever the case may be. But sometimes you might just want that swill, that $10 bottle. And if you only say, I only drink this, or I only drink that, that's where this guy in his book, his name was Jean Elanger, and he wrote a book called The Wine Heretic. And he said, sometimes you just take a jug and throw it over your shoulder, and that makes you happy. And sometimes you drink that $200 bottle of wine, and that makes you happy. I'm guessing you're that guy, Paul.
I am that guy. I think the term is not a beer snob, but a beer whore. But I don't want to say that. But to give you a story to bring the temperature down in the room a notch, I was visiting my father a couple of weeks ago, who has in the mid to late stages of Alzheimer's.
I'm sorry.
And I was caring for him while his wife was getting surgery. And one of his grandkids on that side, who I haven't seen in 20 years, I'm dealing with my dad and we're arguing about his car. This kid shows up at the door with 3 Budweisers that I have not had in years. Yeah. And I look at him, he goes, "Hey, I'm David. Paul, you haven't seen me in a while, but I knew Granddad was home without Grandma tonight, and I knew he could use a beer." That was the best. That Budweiser was the best tasting beer that I have had in decades. And I would argue with any Cicerone as to its qualities and Beechwood aging. And it was absolutely fantastic. Beer is about, I don't know. I'm not to disparage wine, but yes, beer is probably, it's very important. And that moment I'll always remember.
Yeah, I mean, everyone always says, let's go have a beer. And then no one says, let's go have a glass of wine. Although I do enjoy it. I do. And I've come to appreciate all of the spirits and all of the beverages. And again, we're going to do this right now. Pete, if he was here, we encourage drinking, but we do not encourage over drinking. If you are self-medicating and have a problem, please reach out. Everyone's here. We'll all take a phone call. That's what the Ten-Four Tavern is about. Our network will always take a call. All your friends will take a call. Too many of our colleagues have taken their own lives. Please do not do that. And then don't drink and drive. With Uber and Lyft, there's no more excuses anymore. I have a son who's a cop, and he works in a big city, and he likes to indulge, of course, and he has a beer, and maybe he might go too far one night, and maybe his friends might go too far one night. Never drink and drive. Please don't do that. Please don't overserve yourselves to the abusive standpoint. If you have a problem, please reach out. So come on, everybody. Let's get it together. Drink responsibly, but please drinking.
I'm glad you said that, because mental health in law enforcement is a topic near and dear to my heart. My first supervisor in the presence detail took his own life. A coworker took his life. 2 other ones took their life. And then I had an employee when I was leading the counter surveillance unit who clearly, I don't know how publicly it is, but everybody was, "Oh man, she could put it back." She drowned in Spa Creek in Annapolis, and I had to retrieve her body and identify her from the bag that the local police retrieved her with our identifier on a phone. I will see her face till the day I die. And I believe she was an amazing, wonderful person and human that we lost too soon, that had been self-medicating through issues. So please, we're being funny about it. And like, I literally, I could sip this for hours, and enjoy it. And that's what it's about. But yeah, there's no excuse, but self-medicating aside, mental health is serious. Get help. There should be no stigma to it. I mean, you break an arm, you go to a doctor. I don't know why, when something inside your head isn't quite working, or your heart, you don't seek the same medical care. Shouldn't be a stigma for it.
Yeah. So as Pete says, he's not here, but it's okay to not be okay, but it's not okay to not ask for help. So get on that, everybody. If you're listening and if you're paying attention here and you're going through anything, please reach out. I'm sorry, but this law enforcement family, they will take the call and they will talk you through it. And they will tell you all the reasons why you should not harm yourself and not overindulge and not drink yourself into either a death spiral on that or an instant action. So please don't do that. All right.
Let's pivot back to humor so we can get these people up. I'm afraid that we've depressed a few of them.
Hey, the bottom line is this is the tavern, and all the hundreds and thousands of podcasts that are out there, they might have some formats. But this goes wherever it goes. So we diverted, but we're going to get back on track. Presidential detail. Tell everybody. So hold on, VR for Ron Layson, VR forever, 100% Ron Layson. He's got it, but VR forever. Hold on a second. I think there was a joke before. Yeah, 50 episodes. We finally got a guest who.
Hey, it's flocculate.
Focculates.
Flocculate. Yeah. I warned them. I warned them when they had me on that you only hear about 1/100th what the voices are feeding me.
Dr. Beer, right there.
Thank you. So. I prefer Mr. Pibb to Dr. Pepper. I think Dr. Pepper's a little arrogant with all of his schooling. So call me Mr. Beer, please.
All right. So let's do it, man. So your first presidential detail. Who is it? And again, no tradecraft. What it's like for you. How does it feel? How emotional is it? What is the level of intensity on the most serious job you could possibly have in law enforcement?
No, it's interesting, and I was planning to lay it all out there till you stopped me. I was going to just give all those secrets. Really, there's not a lot of secrets to it. The Secret Service is called that because of detective work in the 19th century. But my first detail that I was assigned to, I mean, I've worked with almost every major president. I got cussed out by Ford. You know, I've worked with Carter. Reagan is the only one I never got to meet except at his funeral, sadly enough. And there's a funny story about his funeral. But I was assigned to the George W. Bush detail in 2005. I was an instructor at FLETC, then an instructor at our training center. Oh, that's a lovely picture of Paul. You couldn't really have a beard. And nowadays you see more with beards. That's why I shave now. That is actually in the King of Saudi Arabia's palace in Riyadh, Saudi Arabia, in his guest palace. That was relatively early on in Bush's presidency. I was on Cheney's detail for the campaign and then transitioned to Bush's 43's detail. And what's interesting there is I'm a young agent on the detail. I'm probably operating as the number 4 because they're numbered 1 through 4 seniority and responsibility. My job was standing at the suite door and all of these things were going on around it. At the time, once again, you feel relatively safe. You're in body armor. You're armed. You have all of your skills and diplomacy, but you're inside this enormous bubble of security at that point provided by the Secret Service and the inner and middle, the Saudi Arabian military and police, the U.S. military, special forces that we have on standby, and other things whenever the president travels. But you talk about a level of trust. When you're in the king's guest palace there, you are at their whim. And I've been in 60 countries where you really have to trust, and that level of trust differs in countries, and you bring in more assets. There are some very countries with high level of poverty where we actually literally bring in a surgical suite on an aircraft because the local hospital we wouldn't trust. And it's not their fault. They're just poverty in America and poverty in East and West Africa are far different things. Or in Central and South America. But you're thinking it's a bit surreal. You have to separate yourself from that. You know, having been on the detail for 3 presidents, and I was the assistant detail leader for both President Obama and President Trump, which were 2 very different presidencies. But I remember that detail intimately because he had a ranch, Prairie Chapel, outside of Waco, Texas, and Crawford, Texas. And we spent a lot of time on trucks and in Jeeps bouncing around this 1,800 acres. Or in places like Saudi Arabia. That's an interesting story on that trip because they wanted to cut my hands off. The Saudi Arabians wanted to punish me for opening the limo door for the king. And I'm not sure if I've ever told that story, but an infidel shouldn't.
Well, it's the tavern. Let's hear it.
An infidel shouldn't do that. And that's my job at the time as the number 2 was to open that door. And they, cooler heads prevailed and still have my tiny little hands. But the most surreal thing I remember early on standing post for the president, and it's not like the powerful moments or something amazing, and I had thousands of those over time, funny stories, poignant stories, sad ones, big ones and small ones. But I remember Bush 43 coming down from the residence with his dog and going out of the Palm Room onto the South grounds and kicking a volleyball to the dog. As the sun set over to the side of the Lincoln Memorial, you're looking at the Washington Monument, not the South grounds on the lawn. And there's bats. It's dusk in DC, so there's these bats. The 18 acres of President's Park is trees and wildlife. I mean, there's fox, there's raccoons that end up on it somehow in the middle of DC, and these bats are swooping down. And as a biologist, and sitting here with the most powerful man in the world with his sleeves rolled up, just kicking a volleyball to his dog, and his thoughts as, you know, all of these trees planted by presidents were next to the Jackson magnolia, you know, from the 1820s. That actually saved the president's life in 1994 when someone tried to crash a Cessna into the White House. But you're looking at those surreal moments in time, whether it's at Camp David or, you know, the White House or anywhere in the world, where you're seeing the inner workings, you're seeing the presidents as people, which is really interesting to see behind that veil. And they've all been human. Everybody I've protected, with a few exceptions, and it'll take a few more Clints to get who the worst human we ever protected out of me. I've never said it publicly.
We're not going to. I don't think there's need for it. I
may. But
I can't stop you. But you know, but I think you bring a great point about the human ability of these leaders. And I actually had this conversation with somebody today where I will mention the person's name, where Hillary Clinton couldn't figure out how to run a MetroCard and get into the subway in New York City. And so that it's not a criticism of Hillary Clinton. It's more of how far removed they are because of their positions in real life. And I'm going to tell a story about W that you're talking about with the ranch in Texas. Like, is there a truth to, I'm not going to say who it is because I don't want to give it up, but like, he just wanted to drive his own truck for like 10 minutes. Like, how long has it been since one of these people have driven their own car? As an example.
Bush drove his truck all the time.
Exactly. Because he wanted to bring back, he didn't have to, he wanted
and I do want to preface that the worst person we ever protected was not a Clinton. They were always wonderful to me in my experiences. So I know that's what everybody's thinking. It was not. No, he had a white pickup truck and he would drive. He had 1,800 acres. The scariest thing is the president of the United States with a chainsaw cutting down cedars, you know, that are taking the water from the oaks. And I used to do a really good impersonation, which I will not. I did it on a radio show in New Hampshire and got in a little trouble, so I won't do that again. But he's running this chainsaw and they're burning brush, and you know, he's about to fall off a cliff, and you know, he's mountain biking. That's the funniest story I remember from the ranches. He used to mountain bike, and he called it the first Peloton. Like, they would ride around this mountain bike, and the funniest story. Everybody, I know what people thought of Bush. He was just a kind, funny, brilliant guy. His father was George H.W. Bush, was the kindest human. One of the kindest humans ever to walk the planet. I mean, his former days, an agent's son had cancer. The former president shaved his head to look like this child, you know, and he didn't have to do that. Anyway, Bush was biking and he eats it, flies off this thing and gouges his leg up. And the doc, of course, comes up, is patching him up. And a uniformed officer who's biking with us also must have gouged himself on his pedals trying to get out. And I don't know if I've told this story. The officer goes to the doctor and says, "When you're done with the president, can you please take a look at my leg? I think I jacked it up pretty good." And he goes, "Oh, are you just trying to get sympathy with the president?" And Bush looks up, leg covered in blood. He goes, "Sympathy?" He goes, "You'll find sympathy in the dictionary between shit and syphilis, and I'll give you neither."
See, that's the stuff, man. Come on, man. Like, it's so good.
He's just funny. Literally funny. At Camp David, on his desk in Laurel, where his office was, he had a little sign that said strategery. Like he was in on the joke. But no, he drove his own truck down there all the time.
Yeah. And that's just it. And so you really want to know that they're still in touch with us as the people out in the street, and like how far removed they are. And you know, even local politicians, congressmen and congresswomen who live in, they're out of touch, and we really want to hear about the human ability. And so you know, these stories are important, and what's been out publicly, I I've always said I didn't vote for Clinton, and I'm not a fan of the things he did, but I don't think he was a terrible president. But man, that is a guy I wanted to hang out with. No two ways about it.
He could work a room. I saw him
like nobody else.
I saw him at weddings and at funerals, and I will say before we pivot, President Clinton was one of the first presidents in modern time, the first modern presidents, although I'm not sure where you define that anymore because we tend to define things from 9/11 on and before. But if we look at modern era presidents, to legitimately speak out against rampant government fraud and try to put fraud task forces in place. Now, they failed, and now his party has shifted. If we talk political, and without being political, I find the politics very interesting because we'll have to wait for the fraud thing, but criminals don't care who you vote for. They want your money. They know that the government and the U.S. taxpayer is the most benevolent on earth, and they're going to write off a certain amount. Unfortunately, we started writing off nearly $1 trillion a year and just gone, whatever. It makes me sick. And you mentioned politicians, but it's more than politicians because politicians don't do things. They're not lemmings. They don't leap off cliffs to help the species. Right. Why? Why do they protect grift and graft and fraud, the ones that do?
Yeah. Well, we'll talk about that. Let's finish up on the president, and we'll get into it because $1 trillion is a big number. So we're not going to avoid that. So, so again, good teaser moment right now, an hour and 5 minutes in. And,
why do I look so much? Why do I look so much taller than you? What's and redder?
Because I was told that the camera should come down. So I try to sit lower so the camera comes down because you definitely do not want to look up. But like you have the same position as Pete, and I think I need to change my.
Have you ever seen Austin Powers? You ready?
Yeah, maybe.
Now we're better. Yeah. I'm still like a goblin though. I don't know what the lighting is.
Yeah, we can do a whole bunch of, and I got to do a better speaker situation and microphone situation. I've tried. My son has microphones and we've tried them. Nothing seems to work. I don't know if maybe it's I got to soundproof the room, I think. Anasiga Nicolosi, previous guest 2 weeks ago, she has, because she does podcasts as a profession now in her post career, she has a sound room that gets it perfect. So all that stuff. Our budget for the Finest Unfiltered and the Ten-Four Tavern doesn't allow for that. So to condition a room. So it's on a champagne taste on a beer budget, but you can appreciate a beer budget.
But the HyperX Solocast microphone.
That's the one I had. I had a HyperX.
That's what I have because I literally do international news broadcasts and I do a lot of News Nation right from this angle with this microphone and a Nexigo HD camera. I mean, I have a face for radio, so it's probably better that this were low def or if my camera was off. But I don't even think I have a face for radio. I'm not sure what I have. I have a face for Morse code.
Well, I think the ladies on the call and are on the chat are very happy. They think you're a very handsome man. Very handsome.
Oh, stop.
So, all right. So finish up. Let's go through some of the stories that you can share in the presidential detail. The pressure. How intense is it? Is there a time when you felt like, even though nothing might have happened, like, does it change? Does it sometimes the temperature up or down, or does it always feel the same? Like, what does that feel? I have no idea. What does it feel like to
you
be
get
on
numb
a place and you go into a place that you've never been to?
I mean, you get numb to it because there's a choreography to presidential protection, to the way the inner workings goes, regardless of the environment. The outer and middle perimeter may be different, but the inner perimeter is set, and the choreography of the movements. I had different mnemonics that I would go through. Mine was a little bizarre, but it was called practical, tactical, medical, dedical, aeronautical, hypothetical. That's what I would go through in my head. I had to cover every practical element, every tactical, medical, dedical, aeronautical, hypothetical. And I could go, when I would brief or I would do a walkthrough ahead of time, I'd have to make sure I understood not only what are our regular administrative movements, what's going to happen in case, it hits the fan, what's our next move. And as the assistant special agent in charge, you would work very closely with the White House military office. And you had to think, because it wasn't a matter of just keeping the president unharmed. You could talk about reputational. We would actually be at a site, and if the camera angles were funny, and we've seen 1,000 presidential sites, and that local political kid may not have, we go, I would move the camera here, and they would laugh, or I would move this plant because otherwise it's going to look like his head's on the plant. And we would see these things because you do it over and over. But the Secret Service, well, at its most base understanding, is keeping the president alive. But honestly, what it's doing is keeping the commander-in-chief of the United States military in communication with the military command structure and the continuity of operations of the United States government and the continuity of the presidency through the line of succession, because it has to be seamless. You have to plan to fail. I know it sounds simple, but you have to plan for what happens when it all breaks. You have to think laterally. What happens if this breaks or that breaks, or someone hacks this or this gets shot? What's next? And that's why I know we had a discussion beforehand where we were afraid people were going to attack me because I went on national news on ABC with George Stephanopoulos, and I said the Secret Service's response in Butler was textbook. It was perfect. Go ahead, take shots in the comments. The setup and the advance and the way that site was done and the mistakes that were made are unforgivable. The Secret Service had a horrible job setting up that site. But the minute those shots rang out, they responded as trained, the counter sniper, the counter assault element, the local police element, to evacuate the president to the hospital and deal with. Now, the fact that his head was not hit is honestly sheer luck and training of the shooter. And it was honestly the platform that kid chose. He chose an optics, a red dot sight with no magnification. At 140 yards ahead is the reticle. So he shot what he thought he could hit. If he had a one-time magnification, President of the United States is dead. And I don't know if I'm giving away tradecraft, but anybody would have to know. And then the counter sniper, the furthest away, had that would just peep up. All he had was this much of the shooter's head, and he put that assassin down. And that was the first time counter snipers had been at a former president's site. What if they hadn't been?
Yeah. How
many more people, Corey Comparatori, that father that lost his life, because of Secret Service incompetence in that advance. But I refuse to eviscerate the entire service for the few mistakes. As tragic as they are, there are no jobs in the world where success is invisible and the world only sees those mistakes. That was probably the 7,000 or 8,000 protective event of that year. That doesn't excuse the one mistake, but it should put it in context that humans are unpredictable and messy, and shit's going to happen. You hope to God it never happens, but the sick thing about Secret Service agents and the pathology is they hope they're there when it does. Now, what's funny, they hope they're there. They believe that they're the one who could prevent it from happening. And I know current director Sean Curran, who mounted that stage, shield the president's body with his own, and Nicholas Menster, and the young lady that hugged him in front and put her head on his chest, caught a lot of flack. Where is she putting her head, Tom? What is the chest? It's center mass. It's where the next bullet is coming. And she laid her bean on it. I mean, good God, a toast to the people. Horrible setup in advance in missing those cues. But that response on that stage that day, I don't know how it could have been better.
Yeah, so I think there's been some conversations about, Monday morning quarterbacking, all these incidents, whether it be something as benign as a handcuffed prisoner in New York City, or there was another one in Texas that was raised recently, or all the way up to the President of the United States. Unless you were there, unless you know the full investigation, you should listen to all the people and render your own decision. And nobody wants to hear from you if you've never walked in their shoes and if you are not privy to the entire investigation. Now, you can say, I like to hear this. I like to think this. I think this might be this. I think this might be that. But to come out and say, they did this, they did that. The New York City one is really interesting because there were two very distinct positions on a handcuffed prisoner biting an officer in the leg, and the officer was punching the guy in the ribs to get him to release biting him on the leg. Some people said handcuffed prisoners never to be used force against.
And the person that said that's never been bitten by a subject, right?
Exactly. And all the things that follow being bitten by a subject, you have to go through a battery of medical tests and shots and all of that shit because you don't know what he's got. And that's a tiny thing compared to the president. But what I'm saying is, Paul, you were there, you know it, you trained it. I may or may not disagree with you, but I want to listen to what you have to say and listen to a whole bunch of other people who's qualified and have the credibility to talk. And then I'll decide as a civilian what I think my Secret Service did for me as a civilian, as a member of the United States of America, and as a citizen of the United States of America. And then no one's gonna bring me on Cuomo or Stephanopoulos or Chris Hansen like they would you, because I don't have that credibility.
Well, you'd be surprised.
I want to know, and I want to be informed.
You'd be surprised. I learned the hard way that the experts on the news, I had 12 to 14 years on the president's detail, and there are people talking about giving their opinion who were never a supervisor on the detail or have an entirely different skill set. Like there was criticism and a toast to all of them, but like military snipers criticizing the counter sniper activity, when military sniping in a war zone is far different than a law enforcement counter sniper. There's a different rule of engagement and a different, and unfortunately the way the human mind works, you could stare at the white noise on a TV screen and see faces. The human brain is designed to see patterns. So when there is a lack of information, and unfortunately I don't think it was handled very well from a communication standpoint either, that vacuum is filled with conspiracy. He was on the water tower. If your theory of how he was shot is the punchline of you might be a redneck joke, I think you need to sit back a notch. But everybody's entitled to their opinion. I got my current job by meeting with the CEO and saying, look, I'm incredibly opinionated, but I'm not always right. And he was like, you're hired. Because it's true. I believe that I'm educated and I know these things. But unfortunately, I was reading a book called Nexus by Yuval Harari that's basically about I don't want to go nerdy real quick, but it's about the naive view of information. Basically, it says everybody thinks more information leads to truth, and it's not true. More information means to more passing of that information and communication, but it doesn't lead closer to truth. It depends on the information you're getting. All
right, Paul, let's do 2 questions from the chat, and then we'll go into the presidential detail. Then we'll wrap that up because we're going to transition. We're looking at about an hour and 20 minutes in. So, Detective Nolan, my mindset while working with the Secret Service was that the Secret Service, which usually was at odds with the NYPD supervisors. Did you experience that? It's his perspective. Did you experience that?
What's interesting is I always found as an agent and the detectives I work with in intelligence and on our details, we were one. We were brothers and sisters in arms, and we agreed. Our supervisors had different aims, and I think sometimes egos got involved, and I would have to say that, though this will maybe not make me too popular, that the egos tended on the side of the agents who didn't live and breathe in New York and sometimes thought, and it was generally the newer agents, that I know what I'm doing. I'm a Secret Service agent. What would NYPD be able to teach me? And that's a bullshit way to work. But I do think some of those, I found that it was the supervisors that clashed more than those of us grunts in the field. And when I was a supervisor, I tried to change that. I just think that there were different goals because if the detail that this gentleman worked on, likely, say if it was, say, the president of Ireland, that agent only gives a damn about the president of Ireland's movements. But NYPD, well, someone in the service, in the logistics officer, broadside, is working with it and having to think the bigger picture. That agent on that detail only cares if Ireland is safe and gets from point A to point B. That NYPD person on the detail who lives and works in the city and breathes this every day probably has ingrained in better communication to think, how is it going to impact other motorcades in the shoot? How's it going to impact other details in the hotel? I tended to find that the NYPD people had a bit of a broader view, though there were attitudes on both sides. I'll say that. I just think that some of it was, if there was friction.
Maybe we didn't get it right what he meant.
Okay.
He meant the NYPD boss did not want us thinking like the Secret Service while working with them. So
I guess I'd have to say what you mean, sir, by thinking like the Secret Service. So maybe, yeah, I mean, I did see that, but I found on both sides there was some, like, arm holding of that. These feds aren't going to tell us what to do, so don't be friendly with them. They're not here. They're not your friends. But I don't know what that was. I did not experience that through 23 years of UNs, and I was on details of all sizes. I was on the detail of the president of Iran, Mahmoud Ahmadinejad, which is very timely right now. I had to actually jog next to his armored limo because we thought the Mujahideen al-Khalq was going to use sticky bombs on his car, and I was going to somehow protect it with my body. That was a brilliant idea. But yeah, I'm not sure. I understand kind of the sense of what.
So he's saying it's the bosses that had the conflict, not the detectives.
And I'll tell you, Detective Nolan, probably what that is we would spend half of our time recruiting and half of our time trying to make friends because we wanted to hire people to do the job with us. And I think a lot of the bosses were like, don't befriend these guys. I don't know what they would create friction. And we find that in the service too with some people. So I could see that. I didn't experience it because you guys probably shielded me from it really well. But I could see that because we would go into towns and steal all the best that we could.
Okay, and I didn't really read this, but Stephen S. Tiger, and Stephen, you're LAPD, right? Retired. Just confirm that, please. I want to make sure. Why wasn't the high ground and the line of sight being covered in Butler and the Kirk assassination? Is this not a legitimate question? So if you can go there, go there. If not,
absolutely will. And it is beyond a legitimate question. But you're comparing apples to carburetors. Charlie Kirk, the tragic assassination of Charlie Kirk, was not the Secret Service protective site. So I can't speak to why they did their best. At that point, a celebrity, the security might not have the capability. I don't know why that wasn't more aware. In Butler, what's interesting is I believe the failure in Butler was a failure of not of creativity, but of addressing the obvious threat. How would somebody climb on the roof that the local police is using as a command post and shoot from it? And why not do the mechanics of the site a little further? And I would say the high ground was covered in that it was being watched, but the roof was pitched. They were behind it, not the agents, but the technicians. I'm talking about the assassin. He would peek up over the roof, but that building should have been secured. The Secret Service dropped the ball securing that building. The counter snipers have to secure out to 1,000 yards. Their publicly acknowledged capability is to neutralize threats from an assassin from 1,000 yards. Keep in mind, that's the roof of the White House to the base of the Washington Monument, which lung they will hit from that distance. That's what they train. Now, their capabilities are probably much greater. So they're having to look at this one roof at 140 to 150 yards. I did an analysis for News Nation and Brian Enton immediately afterwards. I found 27 roofs within 500 yards that were also unwatched. If you go out to 1,000 in every tree, it would have taken the entire NYPD to protect all of them. Unfortunately, we live in a society of trust that can't be trusted. When you cannot block those lines of sight, you have to manipulate your sight through environmental changes, moving the bleachers 20 yards so that an assassin would have been behind them and would not have a line of sight, so that the best shots were beyond 700,000 or 700 yards, or you could protect the few. There was a car dealership on the main road. There were some other roofs. So no, I'm not questioning. It is an absolute legitimate question. It was completely shitting the bed not to cover that. It's inexcusable. And that Corey Comperteri's life is the responsibility of those that failed. But what I will say is the neutralization of that assassin was brilliant. The stages of the creation, the villain arc, absolutely. It's a legitimate question. The character arc and this villain creation of that assassin, I don't want to use his name. He was literally bullied in school for being a bad shot by the gun club. And then he spent 3 years going, I'll show you I'm a good shot. He was looking for any target, and it came to his town. I believe his psychopathology was that of a school shooter, not an assassin who found an opportunity of choice. He also built incendiary devices and explosives in a 3-bedroom home for 12 months and was never noticed. 24 packages marked hazardous material. Nobody noticed. And ammo cans. There's a lot of failures along the way that lead to this pathway to violence, and it's far beyond a rooftop. But it's up to the professionals to stop that, and it's inexcusable that they didn't.
Yeah. No, and thanks for that assessment.
Great question.
Great question. Thanks, Stephen S. Appreciate it. LAPD confirmed. I thought so. I didn't want to make a mistake. So
also some of the best people, like the major cities, I felt, even though the threats are higher, working with the LAPD and the LA County Sheriff's Office, work out through a number of things in Los Angeles. It allows the Secret Service to work seamlessly. When you go into those big areas, the service can actually not leave a sigh of relief, but they can relax. I don't know why they relaxed in Butler. But like I said, the service is not, and I would say this applies to people. You are not the sum of your scars. You're the skin in between. Their service is going to have public errors, but the men and women who do it every day do that job in and out. And when people are going on the news just crapping on them for saying, oh, the agency's a failure, they're terrible. That was a horrible incident. And there have been horrible incidents over time. But the fabric of the Secret Service is a century and a half of excellence and protecting the continuity of the United States government and the presidency, which is to be, I just would not allow the entire service to be sacrificed on the altar of someone's political ideology or conspiracy. But did they shit the bed? Sure.
All right. If you can answer this, Nolan, who killed the shooter in Butler? Do we know? Was it Secret Service? Was it not local PD? Do we know it? Or, and again, if ongoing investigation still unresolved,
I can unofficially confirm that I believe that a shot hit his weapon that may have deterred him, but that the kill shot came from the counter sniper operative of the United States Secret Service because of the angle and the autopsy report and the reporting of the individual who had to go and perform his duty at the hospital and the airport without break after taking that life.
All right, so let's have some fun with a couple of presidential pictures because I think they're pretty cool. And I believe these are, because they have cameras following them all the time and there's billions of photographs of each president. And so Paul got captured in a few of them. So he shared them with us. These are probably publicly, they're not private. So, and then we're not playing politics. We're just having fun with Paul and his career. So Obama, the slickest, coolest president of all time. Maybe not my favorite. However, guy was pretty fucking cool.
This was one of my most memorable trips because I got to do the pre-advance where the Secret Service and the military office and the political office go out and they look at the first family wanted to do a national park. So we pre-advanced Zion and we pre-advanced Yosemite. And as the acting assistant special agent in charge, the special agent in charge, who was a great man at the time, and I was the number 2, we bookend the president. And the first lady would follow me when we did hiking, and that blue jacket that I still have, my Eddie Bauer outlet jacket. But to chop her into Yosemite, now this is a once in a lifetime thing, to get to chop her in an H-60 into the meadow across the face of El Capitan and Yosemite Falls to bring the on Nighthawk 2 and Marine 1, and then stay in a cabin next to the president at Yosemite, where I literally the 2 reprimands I got were, Paul, why didn't you bring me out to see the bear? Because a bear ambled, the Ahwahnee Lodge. We were in the cabins, and this bear came up and practically pawed at the front door of his family cabin as we sat there waiting to go, do we put this bear down or are we going to end up on the cover of Nat Geo that we filmed also? So we waited, and the bear jumped in the river, grabbed his toes, and bobbed like a toddler off. And then the next day we did a hike up to I'm not forget which Nevada Fall, I think, and we came down the Muir Trail, and there were bears. Our advance element had seen some bears, and I had to make the call to move our counter assault element or a team up to try to confront these or get these bears away. And it was just funny. Paul, don't shoot the bears. Don't shoot the bears. I was like, sir, we're not going to shoot any bears, and we didn't have to.
So you just mentioned something. One of your few reprimands. Do you get the reprimand straight from the president sometimes? Or does it trickle down and then the next thing you know, you're not on the detail? Like,
no, I mean, that was a place. that was a playful reprimand when he's like, Paul,
Yes.
why didn't you bring me out to see the bear? You know, and he's got his hand on my shoulder. I'm telling you, he was by the end, I was with him for so long that, you know, I knew him pretty well, you know, because I was with his family for a long time. I mean, I didn't have any official reprimands for anything, but you would hear it directly from the president. We were in Vietnam, and they would kept sticking phones in his face, and I would bat these things down. And by the 50th phone, I got so tired of it. It was funny. We get in the back, and it was sort of a playful job, but it was like, my man Paul does not like the selfie. And it was kind of like a joking way to say, you know, simmer down, you know, because we know that there are technologies that you can put a very small shape charge in a phone. Mossad has used them on terrorists, and you can do a lot of damage with a phone, let alone smack you with it. So, of course, we're that one I probably posed for. That's the famous Harry Knuckle shot. That was on my last official presidential trip to East Carolina State on the Pirates. I'm not sure who they were. The press loved to take I was friends with all the press guys, so they would take pictures and send them to me. But they would always try to get me to laugh or make a face. But at this point, I'm sort of scanning the crowd before I look back, because my job was to, as one of the supervisors, to grab the president and evacuate them. But that was on a college campus. And this one, you
know what? Let's do it. Go ahead.
This one was that's the South grounds of the White House after an event where the public was out on the South grounds, and I was walking him back from the residence. You see the flags were up. I believe this was a Wounded Warrior ride, where the Wounded Warriors ride their bikes. They get to DC, and then they ride several laps around the South grounds roadway. And I'm in a very, very oversized cheap suit, and I was walking the president back to the Oval Office.
Yeah, so let me ask you about suits, right? Like, do you buy off the rack if you're on the presidential detail, or you got to get custom suits to look really tight and sharp?
Some guys wore suits, and suits wore some guys. You had to buy them a little big because you had body armor on and your bat belt of a million things, and the Secret Service's tiny classified giant radio. I bought from, I mean, I laugh because I was not, I mean, like, once again, as a face radio, I would look nice in blue and brown suits. And you always had your midnight suit that were a little crappier because no one's going to see it, or the joint operations suit in the original one where everything was asbestos and you were going to get covered in it. But I once wore an outfit literally where I had on probably a $30 pair of shoes, a $40 suit, and a $10 shirt, and a $5 tie. I don't think my whole outfit was $100. And I look like $1 million, Tom. I look like $1 million. But no, I mean, I got some nicer suits as Suit Max and these other Men's Warehouse would come out. You would always wear them out. Your gun and handcuffs would just eat the lining of a suit. Some people spent more on them. Maybe I was spending mine on beer. Although I did.
So I gotta bring this guy in. So Nolan is a big fan of all three shows. He's always on the chats, and we've gotten digitally friendly. We sent him a bottle of Responder bourbon. He reciprocated with $100 donation to the chat, which you didn't have to do, Detective Nolan. I really appreciate that. I'm
going to toast Detective Nolan. I'm going to refill and toast him because that's a good man.
But Mo Ginsberg is a suit supplier from the 80s and 90s who, like, if you walked into the warehouse in Midtown, Nolan, give me the streets if you remember, but it was like the 20s or 30s, the garment district. You would, as far as you could see, it's suits, right? And so, like, anyone who wanted to look decent but not have a custom suit, like, that was probably your best place. Great prices. And then these other places, Krakow or something on Long Island, some of these other suit places, and every detective, well, you know, so here's, in all fairness, like, if you ever wore a good suit in a detective squad in the NYPD, it would be destroyed in a week because all the furniture, all the I'll never forget having a brand new suit. It was like $100, $125 suit, which was pretty good. Stewie, the suit guy, Ron Layson. So you would, like, walk around, and these file cabinets would have these bent edges, and you catch
Ugh.
your corner of your shirt, and it's destroyed. It's like, holy shit! I literally bought this suit like 3 days ago.
I
And
bought a
so
suit.
you always said, I gotta wear shit suits, and then plus, as a detective squad, you're in shitty crime scenes. Imagine being in a blood-soaked room where spatter all over the place and guts, and I'm not being dramatic. It's really what it was. And then, cockroaches and infestations. I mean, I knew guys that would not go out to a crime scene in their shoes. They would either change their shoes or put rubbers on their boots, like galoshes back in the day. So we wanted to look good, but you just couldn't.
Well, in the
But the
service,
Secret Service, I'm thinking you guys should have looked a little better. I'm looking a little better.
I mean, you did. You wanted to blend. Now, there were some people that would stand out. I used to get in trouble before it became popular. I would always wear crazy socks because that's the one thing I could control. We won't go into my underpants, but I would wear crazy socks. No one would ever see them. And then eventually that became more popular, but I would catch hell. But it was funny because I always felt like those rules, like, we don't wear bad, so we wear black socks. I don't know. The manual is the refuge of the small mind, and people that, like, I take the job.
Say that again.
No,
Please say
I will
that
not
again.
repeat that. I said the manual is the refuge of the small mind. It's a guide, but if you go, well, regulation 24-fine, I'm like, but Pete, I took the job and I still take the job incredibly seriously. If your audience takes away anything from today, hope you know that I don't take myself seriously. I am not the job, although I still have the same ethos. I don't take days off. I work, I create things. I work, but I think humor and laughter is be a huge nerd. It's the highest level of Bloom's taxonomy of cognitive development. You've got to survive, and it's why people don't understand law enforcement. You could be at the most grisly murder scene, like you alluded to, and the news catches you laughing. I can't cry at all of them. I can't be. And it was funny because I would do this on rope lines. I would be walking around the people and examining things, and people were fascinated by us because we're fascinating. No, I mean, because we're enigmatic. They don't know. They see, I once got asked in South Africa by a little kid walked up to me in this park. So I'm wearing a suit like a complete knucklehead, 110 degrees in the Kirstenbosch Botanical Gardens in Cape Town, South Africa, sweating, you've got swamp ass going. And this little kid walks up to me and he goes, I think Men in Black was out, and he looks at me and he goes, have you seen any aliens? Like, and I looked down at him, lower my glasses. I said, how do you know I'm not one? He ran screaming. But yeah, you had to blend in a little bit, but yeah, the humor at crime scenes or you'd be working these rope lines. People, can we get a picture? And I'd always have a very stern face, and they go, why don't you smile? And I go, put your phone down. And then they get, then they walk. I said, I'm not gonna let you take a picture of that because nobody fears a smile, and I need you to fear me, not like me.
Right.
What's the old Frankenstein? If I can't get them to love me, I'll have them fear me. That's a quote from Frankenstein that my son.
Or Chaz Palminteri in The Bronx Tale, fear or respect, right?
Take what you can get.
Yeah, he preferred to be feared. Interestingly enough,
I didn't. I don't intimidate a whole lot of people.
He ran a crime crew,
Small people.
You
can barely palm a baseball, Tommy.
I'm sorry, say.
No, we'll skip that. Go ahead.
All right. Any final thoughts? Because we're going to shift to, and we're running an hour 40, so we're going to probably going to go a little over 2 hours. So Pete's going to appreciate the fact that he wasn't here today because he likes to limit it to 2 hours. And when we did an hour 36 with Anasiga, he was like, I love this, bro. When we did 3 hours with Morgan, he was like, bro, no more. So we got to find his place.
Well, I'm enjoying it. You can edit me out as much as you want.
It's all about stamina and our old age, and it is the tavern. So if you got to touch off and go to the bathroom, that's what we do, right? We're in the tavern. I'll be right back. I got to take a leak. No big deal.
I've stood post for hours and hours without an astronaut diaper. You
don't even get me started on depositions. I got notified today. They finally tracked me down. So, all right. Final thoughts on presidential detail. Any funny stories? Anything? We're going to shift to fraud, waste, and abuse, and corruption. $1 trillion. Unbelievable conversation coming up in the next 5 minutes. But before we do that, Any final thoughts, presidential details, funny stories, anything you want to share that we didn't talk to?
I mean, there are a million funny stories. I don't know. It's a surreal existence of traveling around the world with the president of the United States. And I've done it, with Obama and Trump, which traveling with either of them is like traveling with a combination of Elvis and Jesus and seeing people's reaction. And you learn very quickly. And he didn't walk around a lot publicly, but this was us walking down to the ellipse. I was his assistant detail leader. I was on his campaign very early on. I was one of the first agents to interact with him in advance Mar-a-Lago. But the respect that family has for law enforcement and politics aside, he always had a sense of humor with me and was very kind and very engaged. But I should say President Obama was the same way. It's just a different, you see a different, and that's a pretty nice suit, but you'll see, I must have short arms because it's a little long on my wrist there, but
it's a little long on the wrists. I'm going to give you that. You can't shoot your sleeves like Christopher and Paulie in The Sopranos. Remember when they shoot their sleeves? Anyone Soprano fans knows?
No, but you will notice in the picture that there's a pin system, and it's a different color based on the thing, and that was tougher. We landed on Marine One on the South grounds, and there was a crowd waiting. There. I do love that picture. The staff photographer gave me that. But you will notice I was known for matching my tie to my pin. It's just pure genius.
Pin. I was going to say I like the purple with the gray. It's pretty good.
Thank you. I didn't have a lot of gray suits because on real hot days, if you've never been hot, you've pitted out a suit, and wearing a wool suit in the Middle East or Africa or somewhere is not a pleasure.
Well, these new suits have these stretchable materials, and you can ball them up and then break them out, and they got the skinny parts with the skinny legs. I can't do that, but the material, I'm interested in the material, man.
It was hard enough on me when we went from cuffed pant legs to straight pant legs. I thought, oh my God, what am I doing? Am I walking the runway with these? You got to have cuffs, but cuffs, you just can't do them anymore.
So what kind of cuffs, like what kind of cuffs, like did you have a break on your shoe? Did you have a straight leg? What's the deal?
No, I would always do a pretty solid break because you're always moving, and if you don't, and then there were agents who looked like they were always, we always joke that, or I would, that, we're gonna have a party and introduce your pants to your shoes because they were just too far apart. So no, yeah, you got to have a good solid break. So when you're moving around, you don't want that. You don't want to show a lot of your crazy socks if you're like me and wearing weird socks.
All right, last presidential detail picture, and then we're gonna go into fraud, waste, abuse, and corruption. But you were on the cover of New York Times. That's pretty.
It was indeed on the cover of the New York Times. The funny thing is, this was at the Vatican. We were inside at the Pope's apartment. And this picture was First Lady Michelle Obama's, one of her favorite photos. It actually hung up in the solarium where only the family hung out, because while President Obama was still meeting with the Pope, she came down, and the daughters who were not in the meeting stayed in the limo, and that's either Malia or Sasha's bare feet. So that's why it said she wasn't barefoot when she met the Pope, but I was holding the door. I knew that's the number 2 agent. You got to hold it just right. You don't hold it on the handle. You cover the corner. There's a certain way to hold that door because it is not a light door.
Right.
Can't go into the weight of it. But I remember taking the president on a really amazing trip to Ghana, and the limo was parked it had to have been, it had to have been at a 40-degree angle. And I had to open that door, and, I had to brace my feet and hold this door so the First Lady could get in, knowing that if it slipped, it would literally cut her in half. So luckily I held on to it, and that's why we go to the gym. Maybe it was from holding pints so tightly.
Yeah. All right. Well, we're going to shift. So, Paul, you retire from a stellar career in the Secret Service, and you come to a leader in the fraud, waste, and abuse fight. You work for this company. You're the thought leader and the PR guy, pushing the message of how this is unacceptable and really helping the company along for sure. Again, we're not promoting the company here, but your work is meaningful and in your post-law enforcement career, because we as the taxpayer, before you start and talk about the full number, Do you know the individual family number of the cost of fraud, waste, and abuse per family? I've heard it's somewhere around $7,000 to $8,000 per family per year that is being just pissed away. I don't know where that number comes from. I don't know the source of it. This is what I've heard. Do you have anything like that? And then we'll talk about the atrocities and the egregious corruption, fraud, waste, and abuse that's out there.
I have a vague notion. If you accept the $1 trillion number, that a lot of people don't, but I will tell you that it is conservative. It is conservative. Federal, state, and local spending is approximately 12 to $14 trillion a year, and 1 trillion of that being fraud, waste, or abuse is as conservative as you can get. And if you divide 1 trillion by the number of taxpayers, it's $6,700 from every taxpayer. So if you consider how long it takes you to pay $6,700 in taxes, let's say even a pretty wealthy person, if let's say you pay $25,000 in tax a year. I don't know what the average person pays. So you work 3 months of your taxes a year goes to criminals. You're working, and that should be going to fund the government, to fund the operations, or even, it's going to sound like we're delving into politics, because one party, there are these stereotypes of what party wants. Everybody thinks conservatives want there to be less benefits. Everybody thinks the progressives want there to be more benefits, when the fact is the centrist people on both want there to be the right benefits. They want it to go to the right people and not criminals, and fund terrorism and child trafficking and human trauma and terrorism around the world. But of the $4.5 trillion in federal spending, the government acknowledges that it's possibly, or it's $521 billion. And that's just government numbers. And government numbers tend to be very, very conservative. So $1 trillion lost every year that could be going to something more. It could be less taxes, or it could feed more people or fund other issues. And people don't, I say this over and over again, it doesn't seem to strike people. When I say $1 trillion, people glaze over. $1 billion, $1 trillion, what's the difference? But think of it in time. What year was a billion with a B seconds ago? What year was that?
What year was a billion what?
A billion seconds. If dollars were seconds.
Oh, forget it.
It's about 31 years ago.
Right.
Back when I had a glorious mullet. So $1 trillion shouldn't be that much more. 1 trillion seconds ago is 31,000 years. It's saber-toothed tigers and mastodons. So we're talking mullets to mastodons, and the difference in this money that could be helping so many more people. Criminals don't care who you vote for. Transnational criminal groups don't care what you care about or how benevolent you are. And unfortunately, they use these networks, and it's been disaster fraud that sort of opened the door, I would say, beginning with Andrew. And then there were these sea changes and these monumental revolutions in fraud from Andrew through Katrina and the other, the other things. And then obviously the pandemic just set it all on fire. But every disaster is the first loss is a home, and the second is the crime that follows on its heels. They've gotten so good that the fraud almost arrives before the storm in every program. And you hit on it earlier. Politicians seem to protect it. Even those that claim they want to fight fraud sometimes just want to campaign on it. And then those that don't want to, they want to campaign on it, but nobody wants to fix it. But why? Who's paying them to do that? And what NGOs or nonprofit organizations are profiting from this fraud? Why protect the fraud? I don't understand it. I started, and I would love it if some viewers would go on YouTube and find Fraud House Rock. I'll do that. I'm a known knucklehead, but just for fun, I started creating Schoolhouse Rock type videos about fraud. I haven't gotten very far.
Give me the URL.
Fraud House Rock. At Fraud House Rock is the YouTube channel.
Fraud House. Is it Fraud House? Okay.
Fraud House Rock. It's also in my LinkedIn, a link to the YouTube page. I've only uploaded 4 videos. I've already had trolls tell me I should go die in the Strait of Hormuz, because I did a video about self-attestation. The honor system shouldn't be operable in benefits. I find that funny. If I've touched on a nerve, I judge a man or a woman by their enemies. And if I've touched a nerve with people that think that I want to stop fraud, then I'm sorry. I just don't believe that we should fund crime and criminals and people that are out to harm people when you can stop it. But yeah, Fraud House Rock are these silly little videos. If you remember Schoolhouse Rock, Conjunction Junction, and I'm only Bill.
What's your function?
I started doing self-attestation nation. I have this fraud is your fraud, and then I have the themes. It's complete and utter silliness. I use 7 different AI platforms. I cannot sing or play an instrument, but it really in the end will be to educate people about fraud and make you smile while you're at it, and hopefully get some earworms so you can't get the songs out of your head. But it's amazing that people fight this, or I call them the fraudless earthers. The same people who believe the earth is flat believe there's no fraud. And there's been fraud since people have been on this planet. Back when we were cavemen, if I was trading you a basket of rocks, I'd have crappier rocks in the bottom. Or if it was wheat, I'd have sand. It'd be salt water instead of fresh water. People have been defrauding each other throughout time. It's getting industrialized, it's getting digitized, and now it's getting automated through AI and other processes. And there is no single program that is immune from it. It makes me sad when people fight it or say that I'm not going after people on benefits. Like, there are 40 million Americans that rely on food stamps, and my heart goes out to them. But through 20 years and trillions of dollars in my tax money, poverty's increased. So that's not working. If we could stop the fraud in the SNAP program, which I believe to be $10 and $20 billion a year, I could feed 60 million people and happily do it. Because I can get by on the taxes I pay. But it's not. They think that we'll just give it out, that speed and security are mutually exclusive. And they don't have to be, because what I call, and I'm probably stealing it from Greg Gutfeld, but the prison of 2 ideas, or the bias of the binary. People can look at me and say, well, that dude's insane. I can also be right. I can be nuts and right at the same time. You can give out aid and protect it. Order on Amazon, go to your bank. They identify you and verify things in milliseconds. Why can't we do it for benefit programs, and why can't we do it to vote? But that's a whole different issue.
So I heard a crazy number about homelessness, and maybe it was San Francisco, maybe it was somewhere else, that the amount of spend per homeless person is about $80,000 to $85,000 per year. So, like, if these homeless, and you want to put the taxpayer money into that, and you really want to get them off the street, well, first of all, one thing we know is that it's not because they can't work, and it's not because they can't get a job. And if they want to be housed, they could be. These are mentally ill and drug addicted people that need a different kind of help than just affordable housing, which they'll make you believe, which is what I hear in my hometown, Charlottesville. Oh, we need more affordable housing. We have too many homeless. Those are not the
Those are
same
two
thing.
separate issues. We need affordable housing because my son, who has he's a computer engineer with a great job.
Right.
When I made his salary that he makes now, a home was twice my salary, and I could afford it. The average home here is 8 times his salary for a starter home. That has nothing to do with homelessness, as you said. And when you look at the numbers, what I want to talk about is, let's say in one state, and I don't want to talk because it's red states, it's blue states. Fraud is purple. It doesn't care. One state had $40 billion to help the homeless. $40 billion. The cost of the war in Iran so far. And that was thousands of bombs. How many homeless were housed? 0. So where did the money go? It went to NGOs and nonprofit middlemen and salaries from these groups or politicians. Nobody knows. I was listening. I'm a huge Howard Stern fan. Always will be. Baba Booey to y'all. He had David Spade on the other day. And when David Spade, who's hilarious but a brilliant comedian, says, hey, I live in California, and we gave $20 billion to a train, $40 billion to homeless. It's not politics to say, why can't we audit that? That's not political.
That's right.
When you have people in the entertainment industry recognizing that, thanks in small part or in large part to a brilliant YouTuber and investigator, Nick Shirley, who's willing to ask a question. People are afraid to ask questions. Like, I love our LAPD friend who said, isn't this a legitimate question? Absolutely. And I'm glad you asked it. But if you ask about fraud, you're anti-immigrant, you're racist, or you're classist, or you're sexist. And it shouldn't be that way. Fraud doesn't care. And you literally could expand programs if you just got the money right. I mean, we all have our own political leanings. I believe one side wants to give you the tools to join their country. All politicians are rich. I'm going to start with this. I've guarded the biggest, most beautiful houses in Democratic administrations, Republican administrations. Without identifying that, I will tell you that one party seems to want to give you the tools to be able to be a member of their country club. And another party seems to want to give you the tools to be able to work there. and I look at those a little different. I'm not, maybe I delve too far into politics, but that's how I view it. And I've become deeply cynical and it kills me. I've always been sarcastic and skeptical because I believe Carl Sagan, who's one of my favorite authors and scientists, billions and billions in the cosmos. He thought his underlying idea was that people should have a stronger baloney detector. And how fundamental is that in life? If you give your children anything, have them be skeptical, question things. Question even what looks like reality. And with AI and deep fakes and things, what is reality anymore? But in law enforcement, we took a tactical pause before we reacted. It looks like you're being slow, but in the Secret Service tactics, we'd always say slow is smooth and smooth is fast, or something like that. So take a tactical pause, but people don't do that. They're reactive because as a fraudster, I can hit your amygdala and your lizard brain and get you to react quicker than I can get you to think. And that's what the opponents do. They feel before they think. And they tell me I should go die in the Strait of Hormuz for doing a silly disco video about self-attestation. But it is tragic because you look at these programs and the numbers are staggering. And it's not just California, New York, or any blue state. It just happens to be the programs and the largesse is bigger in these states because their economies are larger. It's a matter of scale, not politics.
Yeah. So as and you say, which side you're on, and like I find myself, growing up a Democrat. My parents were probably Kennedy Democrats. I don't know that for sure, but looking back, I can probably predict that. Union, blue collar, workers, and then the only reason I leaned into the Republican Party is because they were pro law enforcement, criminal, not necessarily all of their financial and economic and business policies per se. And then, but I'm socially liberal, fiscally conservative, and right of Genghis Khan on crime and homeland security. So
just right of Genghis Khan.
Just right of Genghis Khan. Because I would pillage and plunder anyone who terrorizes other people. I would tear through that community and with no mercy. They need to go to jail forever and need to be really, and I have a beautiful brother-in-law who is a liberal, but is a common sense liberal, not a progressive, crazy liberal. And we have these talks and he says, no, as a clinical psychologist, I know that the greatest predictor of behavior is previous behavior. So these recidivists, what are we going to do with these recidivists who continually commit crimes? Can they be rehabilitated? Some can, but most cannot. How do we handle them? Being arrested for the 45th time and being arrested for a violent crime with a low bail or no bail is not going to solve the problem.
Well, so, and treating the victims more harshly than the criminals drives me crazy. And
I don't want to get off that topic but that's the behavior. No. And so these criminals are stealing too. And I have yet to see, well, you know what? What was really funny about Minnesota, I'd love to hear you comment about Minnesota, is when the recent child care Nick Shirley scandal broke, they came out with this story about, 75 people have been arrested in Minnesota already, which may be true, but how come we didn't know about it? And how is that? How did that didn't fix the problem because you did that, but it's still going on. And all of these Nick Shirley videos seem to be presenting child care facilities with a massive amount of money. So it might have arrested a few people, but it didn't fix the problem.
No,
Am I wrong on that?
You can't arrest your way through this because, and what you often hear is, well, fraud in the SNAP program or fraud in the Medicare program is 0.1% because they justify and they define fraud by prosecutions. It's like by saying that, like judging the amount of speeders by tickets. I hate to break it to people, but that's not a good parallel or a good metric for that. And you're referring to the Quality Leering Center, which actually, if people are looking for something entertaining, the Quality Leering Center actually has an X page that is hilarious. Quality. I was trying to get them to show my Fraud House Rock videos on the Quality Leering Center, but you can't arrest your way out of it. It requires strong policy and identity verification and authentication. The same things that companies use. Know your customer. The government doesn't, because we are repeatedly told that it's too hard for people to go through the hoops. Now it can be sometimes, but there was also a millionaire in Minnesota who drove a Lamborghini to pick up his welfare, who just wanted to show how easy it was with self-attestation. And that's the problem is, I know, and that's probably why I caught heat, because self-attestation makes it sound like all fraud is from individual recipients. And it sure as hell is not. It's industrialized. It's transnational criminal groups. 70% of the money stolen from the U.S. government goes overseas to fund terror, cartels, triads, money laundering, human trafficking, child exploitation. It goes overseas. And those cartels work with gang members. They work with money mules in the United States, but they're doing it at scale. In the digital economy, you can't, we have these privacy absolutists who say, well, we'll eliminate all data. Hey, good luck with that. Try getting an affordable loan, healthcare, insurance, or anything. Your identity's been stolen. It's a matter of when it's weaponized. Being smart about it and being a skeptical consumer and interacting. You can't withdraw. You can't be a hermit. You can try. Lord knows I have. I work from home, which means I live at the office, which sometimes can be a whole lot of fun. But the fraud, waste, and abuse. And fraud is one angle of it. People say, well, that's an improper payment. Waste and abuse, they're not as criminal as obviously fraud is a specific definition. Waste and abuse can be in the eye of the beholder. I tend to think there's a lot of that. I think that like the NGOs that are the middlemen, or like the USAID that wanted to do tremendously benevolent things around the world, $40 billion budget, but I guarantee $20 billion a year that went to the middlemen who had the warehouses. I can't prove it, but I can look at their books, and somebody can. I bet Nick could. Most benevolent nation on earth. We feel like that we can continue this train of theft and grift and graft. But as I said, I become deeply cynical when I look around. I see. I live a wonderful life that I worked hard for, and I have far more than I ever deserved and expected, but far less than millions of other people that probably worked 1/3 as hard as I ever did. And what I'm starting to realize is many of this is funded through these loopholes, these gray areas in the laws and the policies that allow my tax money, this giant sum of money that we're borrowing from our great-great-grandchildren at this point, though it's $35 trillion in nature, the national debt. There was a study recently that said it might be closer to $100 trillion. We'll never pay. You need a little debt. Hamilton proved that, and even Franklin believed early on in the creation of the country that you had to have a national debt, because if you didn't owe anybody money, they didn't have an interest. Your friend who owes you $20, you're going to invite him to your party. The one that keeps borrowing it never never borrows, it doesn't interact with you. You're like, whatever. But the guy that owes you money, you're going to treat very well, and you're not going to attack him. Why would you blow up our infrastructure if you've bought all our T-bills? Right. So while they're still setting themselves up, and I would say the Chinese and others through cybersecurity. But one last thought on the fraud. I don't see it as a financial problem. I see it as an identity and a trust problem, because identity sits at the foundation of any attack on any of the security in that ecosystem, whether it's physical security, cybersecurity, national security, program security, or other. And all of it is national security. One grandmother has her life savings stolen. Her trust in the financial system is shaken, and it really does reverberate. And the people's trust in their government has, it's called hyperbole, not hyperbole, because I do tend to catastrophize. I was a paid paranoid for too long. My back is to the wall and I close the window. I don't sit with the room behind me. I could never do what you're doing because I would know that door would open and someone would attack me with an axe. So that's why I've got my face to the door and my back to the wall. But you can be it can be hyperbole, but the stuff that's going on has got to stop, and it is unsustainable. I don't believe we're in a worse pitch than we ever have been in history. This country has been through far worse. We've proven ourselves to be incredibly resilient. I believe the next generation will do things that we've only imagined. AI has started that. It's accelerated things. We talked online about how we use it. Even as old men use it. I'm not generally an early adopter. It took me forever to get a TiVo. I loved my VHS recording, my X-Files. But I just wish people asked more questions. I wish you could trust more, but you can't.
Well, I think people want to ask the questions. I think they've been frightened into a corner that they've been, like you said, as soon as you start asking the questions, there's accusatory pointing of fingers right in their nose to say, don't you dare ask that question. You're not allowed. And I always thought that even the appearance of impropriety was a problem. So why can't you ask that question? Because if you ask that question, you should have a good response to it. And if you have a good response to it, then I'll go away and I'll walk away and I'll be fine. But you don't have one. And so it's like, Paul, we all know it. I think the audience knows it. We've all seen it at some level. You know it a lot more than most. What do we do to fix it?
Here's the problem. Upton Sinclair, a famous American author, I think he was American, he once said that it is difficult to get a man to understand something when his income depends on him not understanding it. No more brilliant word. I mean, of course, have a strong baloney detector was smarter, and I'm sure they were, look out for number one and don't step in number two, and any Will Ferrell quote were more brilliant. But I don't know what you can do, but accountability has to play into the situation. We've got to be better partners and stewards of our future and future generations. And these are not infinite resources. And I do believe that some in these programs, think that these programs are infinite and the money is fake. And it is very much not fake. I think there's some people scrambling tonight to meet tax day tomorrow who will tell you, and I owed tax money this year, and I paid it willingly, knowing that it was helping other Americans or funding the things that it needs to fund. It's a cooperative environment and cooperative government that requires us to be a part of it. But that does not mean that we have to turn a blind eye when our politicians and business leaders are careless with our money.
Well, I'll tell you a funny story that you mentioned, because tomorrow's tax day, and my wife was telling me, like, I'm going through, I'm looking at the thing, I got to cut this check tomorrow, I got to wire it. It's like, so come on over here. I go, I don't even want to look.
Don't look.
I don't even want to look. Just do it. Just do it. I don't want it because I'm going to get mad. I'm going to get really pissed off because I'm going to talk to Paul tonight, and I'm going to hear about the fraud, waste, and abuse. And I don't want to know the number. I don't want to see it.
You're going to hear that 1/5 of that check you wrote to the government will go to a criminal somewhere who is abducting a child, trafficking fentanyl, fomenting terror, or robbing other citizens of their money. And you paid for it. No,
you know how much beer that would buy? If I could get 1/5 of that back, you know how much beer we could buy for the audience.
I'm notoriously tonight? Alligator armed. That's why I make my own.
And the finest Unfiltered 170,000+ subscribers, we could buy a beer for everybody a couple times over. So yeah,
I'm not buying a beer for everybody here. I'll buy a beer for one or two if they find me at the Crooked Crab.
Final segment, last dialogue for you on fraud, waste, abuse, and corruption. I want to add, if you think it's a bad idea, fine. I just think we used to say fraud, criminals, waste, government incompetency, abuse. They stretch it. I think we figured out that there are politicians who are turning a blind eye to it. Either they're being paid or For some reason, they're turning a blind eye to it. I think corruption needs to be added to it. Maybe you agree, maybe you don't. I don't know. Final thoughts on fraud, waste, abuse, and Tommy's corruption. And then we're going to do Platypus leadership because we didn't get to that yet.
Platypus.
And then we're going to do that. We're going to wrap up, and then we'll do some house cleaning at the end.
I don't know if everybody wants to hear about the platypus.
They want to hear about the platypus.
I don't know. They maybe parry the platypus and Dr. Doofenshmirtz. But no, corruption absolutely falls under abuse, and it doesn't have a single home. It doesn't have a single party. It exists.
Yes.
Washington's been corrupt since it was built. But that doesn't mean there aren't good leaders and there aren't people that can wade through it and people trying to do good work. But unfortunately, everybody is swayed by one of 7 things. And I will challenge the listeners to name them all. But all of the motivators for crime and all the motivators for victim can be found in the 7 deadly sins, which actually predate the Bible. They were ancient, I don't know, Mesopotamian or something. But a criminal is seeking to sate, whether it's their lust, greed, envy, sloth, or gluttony, and they're preying upon you when they try to steal your money because of any one of those 7 things. I think I missed 2. Those are really the underpinnings of fraud, the underpinnings of crime, and the motivations for most human activity. Because at the end, we can talk as digital as we want. We can talk about these firewalls and ways to protect you in a digital environment and the most elaborate, biological identity and all of these things that we can do. But the best firewall is between you and your keyboard. This is the most, you and I have both walked in various, very dangerous places. I've been in Kabul in fighting season in just soft body armor because the guy who was protecting was also a bald, pasty dude. And he asked me why I was not in dragon scale and in a helmet and kitted out. And I said, sir, I want to give the terrorist a 50-50 chance of hitting you rather than 100% chance. And he was like, God bless you, and but most people won't cross that. But how you interact on that keyboard every day is the most dangerous place. And I don't care if you live near Baltimore like me, basically the Wire in some places, it's a beautiful city with its own set of issues. But that keyboard is the most dangerous place most people will tread.
Interesting. Fascinating. All right, man, let's do it. You heard it, folks. Probably one of the thought leaders in the country on fraud, waste, abuse, and corruption and all that money and tax money. So check out I'm going to do it one more time. Go to his
not
YouTube,
much there yet.
House Rock.
I'm just getting started. Just getting started.
Paul's little project. Maybe Paul, we should have you like on a regular segment and do like quarterly or even monthly updates or something on what's going on in fraud.
Thoughts from the platypus.
From the platypus. So let's do thoughts from the platypus. Mike Hartenstein again, second shout out. He said, "We're gonna love the platypus."
I don't know. Mike's a known rascal. Or was that Breslin? The platypus is born of my own insanity and being a former biology teacher.
Hold on. The third friend of ours, U.S. Secret Service, Paul Haggerty. Whoa. I didn't get his take on what tonight was going to look like, so I apologize. But I'm going to go to him tomorrow and say, what do you think Paul did? Whoa.
Paul is a great American, and we all looked up to him a great deal. Those of us on the president's detail, Paul, just a great man.
Yeah. All right, platypus, let's do it.
The platypus, it's hard to explain. It is insane. As a biology teacher and as a person who's entering law enforcement, not in the military, not in law enforcement, not special forces, but as a high school science teacher and beer store owner, I always felt outside of the circle. I always felt different. Like if you look at mammals all have certain properties, and you don't need to be a high school science teacher to explain what a mammal has. A platypus is a mammal, but it lays eggs. It has an electrosensing duck bill. It has a tail like a beaver. It has poison spines on its hips. It lactates by just milk just coming out of sweat glands, and it lays eggs like a bird. So this sucker is broken. But this dude somehow works. He's in the streams of Australia. There's only 3 mammals left in the world. There's 2 spiny anteaters, and this platypus. What's interesting is I teach a course in leadership for the Army Corps of Engineers. And that's sort of where I developed this, because I always considered myself, I'm a mammal, but I'm a platypus. Not better, somewhat broken with this set of flaws and skills that don't seem to fit today's environment. Lay some eggs, maybe I did on today's podcast. But when I would look at leadership, I go to these leadership seminars and they quote great leaders, which is awesome. I tend to study Roman Stoicism, so you can hang out with some of the best leaders in the world, but you can also hang out with rich people. You don't get money, and if you hang out with chickens, you don't learn to lay eggs. Like, so just being around something great doesn't make it great. You enter your environment, or you enter the world with these set of unique skills, these broken parts of you. And I said before, you're not the sum of your scars, you're the skin in between. But I'm going to be my own devil's advocate and say those things that are different, those skills, those poisonous spines and electrosensing duckbill that other mammals don't have a use, and somehow you survived tens of millions of years. So as a leader, you have a team that is just like that. Everybody is broken. Everybody is brilliant, and you can't fire them. You can't get rid of them. Your job as a leader is not to write off Paul because he's a little nuts, or write off Tom because he's smarter or stronger than you and shoots better. It's to find where your skill set fits in, because the team working is better. And you as an individual need to not fight your flaws, but lean into them. It's like Operation Aikido. Use the enemy, any strength against them. I can't become a perfect leader by changing. I'm going to step into every environment, and all of your planning goes to, what did Mike Tyson say? That, everything is great until you get punched in the face.
Everyone's got a great plan until you get punched in the face. Yeah.
And that's the same with leadership, or even being a member of a team. But as a leader, you're going to have these things. For me, it's humor. I found a way to make it work. It rubbed a lot of my supervised. We do need a platypus emoji. Use a duck and a rat. Use a duck rat. But it's a skill set that people need to lean into. Exactly. Everybody brings something to the table, but not everybody might recognize it as a benefit. The platypus has learned to evolve. He didn't have to take on the skill set of the placental mammals from North America and these other, not to be too big a nerd, these other things that these predators and carnivores and other things did. He succeeds and thrives by leaning into his brokenness, or leaning into these, what are seen by some as faults, and they're not. They are individual strengths that you find a way to make work. For me, like I said, it was humor. It was my biology. I just did this keynote in Vegas at the nation's largest security conference, ISC West.
You can throw a shout out to ICS West, right?
ISC West, run by the Reed Exhibition folks, one of the most amazing security conferences. And my boss and I did the keynote, and I did it from a biological anatomical perspective. I'd love to share it, of how I view security through this biological lens. That's my platypus coming out. That's how I view things, like that practical, tactical, medical, dedical, aeronautical, hypothetical. It's something that works for me that might look nuts to you, but it's those atypical or asymmetric skills that you have, because you can't change. I can study leadership just like I can study music, but I'm not going to write Mozart or Van Halen. And for me, I can study beers and I can make them, because that's one of my platypus skills. But I'm trying to digest that, do that as quick as I can, because I know we've gone long. But I teach a course based on leadership lessons from the platypus. And I know it's a bit nuts, and maybe it's a bit progressive to accept people at their faults. But luckily, men and women throughout my career didn't toss me aside because I was atypical or a platypus. They found ways for my unique skill sets to work. And I rose to the assistant detail leader on the most important and impactful executive protection force in the world. So it worked.
So I think I'll share, like, listening to you talk, like in 1999, I was given my first command, 7-9 Precinct Detective Squad. As a lieutenant, I had 3 sergeants, 35 detectives, and I thought I was going to go in there with a leadership style. And what I realized 5 years later when I left is I needed 38 leadership styles, not because every one of those people were very different. And so no one told me that in sergeant school. Nobody told me that in lieutenant school. They just
gave you a manual.
Yes, they gave you a manual. It's the regulation of the small mind.
It is the refuge of the small mind.
Refuge. I'm trying to write. That's why I need a producer. You know, I'm multitasking, and I only get 1 salary for this, not 3 salaries for the 3 jobs I'm doing. So that was the one thing that I took away 5 years later, 1,856 days later, in that place, which was a beast. It was a busy squad, a lot of murders, a lot of shootings, a lot of homicides, a lot of tragedy, but a lot of beautiful people in that community. And you had to be able to be the empathetic cop who could find those and then see why you're doing what you're doing. And I was grateful for the men and women of the detective squad that saw that too. Some didn't, most did. And it was a beautiful place because those people live in tragedy and they can't get out so easily. I listened to John and Eric and Marlon, and they had a guest on the Finest Unfiltered, and the guest was talking about Howard Beach and the small crimes versus the petty crimes and break into cars and burglaries versus the serious crimes. And it's like, look, like we know these crimes are not as serious as some of the more violent precincts, but these crimes are causing people to move out of our community. So whether you like it or not, you think they're minor as a cop, as the police administration, you better not look down on us and not pay us mind because, yeah, they're not as serious as the shootings and homicides in another precinct, but we are losing constituents. Our people are moving out.
Well, it impacts the quality of life of those under your care. And it doesn't matter whether it's a mailbox theft or a murder. If someone feels unsafe or that they can't participate in that, you know, and that's why it is the finest, you know, and I'm proud to be a part of it here because the men and women of NYPD and law enforcement stand on that line every day and fight for those. They put on their uniform, they put on their cheap suit like I did, and they step outside doing, and that's why when I see the criticisms from some people, I've come to a point where I almost laugh because they're from people that don't understand pride. They don't understand something larger than themselves or doing something for others. And I'm really privileged to be here among men and women who do.
Well, thanks. And Paul, thanks for coming on. And you were very, very gracious in a lot of the earlier conversations between just you and I about being privileged to come on. And then you said it at the beginning with, you know, this is episode 42 of the Ten-Four Tavern. It's a different take than the executive perspective with Ron and Rob. They take a police perspective from the executives and their perspective. It's a very clear and descriptive title for their podcast. And then John and Eric talk about all the things that are going on in the city and in the police department that should be righted. And there are three different takes on three different things. There's no reason for Pete and I to repeat what Ron does and repeat what they're being said. And we agree mostly, but not always with everything that's being said on these things. But to your point, is Pete and I work really, really hard to find the people that we know either directly or through a 1 or 2 degrees of separation of the true people who did the job, the real stories told by the real people, not fakers, not posers, not someone who was peripheral and said, well, I was there and I know what happened. Were you the case detective? No. Then I don't want to talk to you.
Right.
Because I had 2 people, a detective and an FBI agent, who were on this show, who were the case agents on a RICO case. And when I did the research, which was my own case, by the way, I was the supervisor in charge, but I still did the research to refresh my memory and to bring some fact. And all I could find was some detective who I never talked to. I was the freaking commanding officer of this thing. I never talked to him. This guy's got more videos than these other 2 guys who are our guests. How the F is that possible?
Well,
because he's telling a story that it's not his story to tell.
It's a great story, just not the right person to tell it.
Right. And then I have a friend, and I'm not going to mention his name, who's a badass mother effer, who worked in the Joint Terrorist Task Force, who slept in tents in the Middle East, who was also the case detective, although he was probably 10 at the time, but it was the 1975 LaGuardia bombing. And I said to him, hey, there's a podcaster who wants to talk to you. I know the podcaster. I know you. I want to do the introduction. He's just like, Tommy, I'm not going to do the podcast. I'll talk to them, but I'm not doing it. And I said, well, you should do it. And he goes, I'm not freaking doing it. And I said, if you don't do it, someone else is going to tell the story. And you know what he said to me? I've already been in the audience where my pictures that I took were being presented by somebody else, and they didn't even give me credit for taking the fucking picture and being the fucking case agent.
Yeah, it happens all the
and
time.
He told me, and Paul, this is the nerd stuff that you'd appreciate. He gave me the name of the camera and the film and the size of the telescopic scope. He goes, I shot that with a Nikon 45
with a 9F stop, and
that motherfucker is presenting, and I sat in the audience and listened to it. And he goes, I didn't say a fucking word because they're fakers and they're posers.
Well, and that's a good point that he has, because I get asked all the time, sometimes people in the Secret Service around it, why do I go on so many news things around the world and talk about the Secret Service? It's to keep kind of a sober voice of experience and reason. And if I don't, a rascal who was not there will. Some agent who wasn't even in the Secret Service will opine, or somebody who was only there for a year will give their expertise, or never did the president's detail, or never supervised it. So I'm not saying my opinion on all those things is right, and I'll debate anybody. I think mine's more informed than not only 99.99% of Americans, but 99.9% maybe of other agents. That was the one thing that I did a lot of, at least on the president's detail. There are certainly smarter voices and more experienced voices that exist. I'm crippled by imposter syndrome, but the only thing that soothes me is that, you know who doesn't get imposter syndrome? Imposters.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah,
there's that word again, rascal.
I don't know why. I just started using rascal a lot because it just makes me laugh. And when you take somebody that you really just want to call a complete bleepity bleep and D-bag and you call them a rascal, they don't know what to do.
Yeah. So if I were to interpret the 3 shows on the Finest Unfiltered platform, I think John and Eric and Marlon have had a seat at the table. Therefore, their opinion matters, whether they're right or wrong. You can agree or disagree. They can opine. Then Ron and Rob take the executive, retired inspector, and a retired deputy chief from the NYPD, and they interpret the laws and the policies of policing and stuff. And you can do that. And then we're just storytellers here. And this is not a debate stage. But the funny thing about the other 2 platforms is they have encouraged anybody who wants to come on and go against what they've said, Ron and Rob's interpretation of policy and procedure and law, or Eric and John and Marlon's opinions, no one takes them up. That's the funny thing.
Of course
they
not.
say, come on, come bring it. And no one ever shows up. So they all criticize in the vacuum of social media, and they do what they do, but no one ever shows up.
Little men with big opinions. That's what the internet has created.
And I'm going to say it, and I said it to their faces, and I said it on the origin story of how Pete and I got on, is Pete and I were both guests on the Finest Unfiltered. And I said, I don't agree with everything you guys say, but I like that you're talking about it and bringing those conversations to the table.
Absolutely.
And I would say, if someone were to ask, well, how much do you agree? Most of it, but not all of it, for sure. And their interpretation, it's there. They're human, and it's the same thing. And I'm going to say Marlon is always insightful with a different perspective. Eric has a different perspective. John has a different perspective. And even the 3 of them don't always agree. Ron and Rob don't always agree. But it's interesting. And if this is your world, you live in it. But any invite you're never going to get a debate invite here on this channel, because we're just telling the stories and sharing it. And it's not a debate stage. But no one's ever taken them up. And that's what I find fascinating. If you don't like what they're saying,
nobody argues.
They said, come on and we'll be polite. They won't show up. No one shows up.
And nobody ever argues with the platypus.
Well, they've got an electric bill, you know? So.
Yeah, they'll zap you.
Yeah, Marlon does his homework, Nolan, for sure. Marlon's fast, rapidly, for a person I've never met. I only know him virtually in emails and text messages. He's an interesting guy. I wish I knew him on the job. We both worked in the 7-7, but at different times together. Marlon's, and he helps me a lot with our social media stuff. So he's a good egg for sure. Anyway, let's wrap up. Paul, great job, great show, entertaining, funny, informative for sure. I think we're going to get great feedback. Love to have you back. Come in. Anything that pops up. This is the tavern. So if we have a guest and you show up to have a beer one night, you never know. You give us, a little segment and stuff like that. So anything you think, Stephen SS Tiger, great guest, great show. Thanks, brother. Salute. So Blue.
Thank you. And the beer's not going to drink itself, so we got to help it.
Yeah. We're at 2:24, so Pete would be very upset with me, and I'd be hearing shit tomorrow morning because he likes to go to bed and tuck himself in early. But really great, really informative. The presidential detail, your journey, funny, entertaining, non-traditional. But you know what? Now I understand why nerds have a place in the Secret Service. And
wait a minute,
is that we all have our places.
Was that your big takeaway?
No, it's one takeaway. It's not the big takeaway.
That's what I taught my kids very early on. What you tell a nerd after high school, sir or boss.
And I'm building a team right now that I don't want 3 people of the same. I want 3 different, very diverse people, not in ethnicity, although that's fine. I want diversity in thought and skills and experience. And one of those people who would fall under the DEI diversity, it's a checkbox. He's like, fuck that. I'm not that. I'm American. I'm American. So
cognitive diversity is what you need. Yes. But I do want to give a toast to Mike Hardestein, Mike Breslin, Paul Haggerty, Mike Platy.
Paul Haggerty.
Secret
our
Service.
Three mutual U.S. Secret Service friends. You could throw Platy in there too, but I don't really know him well. But
good man. Worked with him closely.
I don't know. I don't know him well enough yet. So if you say so, he just jumped up a few.
I don't know. You can't have platypus without a platy.
That's right. All right. So hold on a second. I got to do some house cleaning, Paul. So if you want to stay, listen to the house cleaning, and then we'll do a green room follow up. Gosh, I'm so bad because I get so sucked into the
there's snacks in the green room.
However, all right, tomorrow night, 5:05 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, 17:05 for those on the military time. We have Ron Layson and Rob Lukesh. They're bringing Joe Cortizas on tomorrow to talk about, I'm going to read it if I can find it, facial recognition. So I have a lot of experience with facial recognition, not as an end user, although we did start using it with Kenny McKeel and the Republican National Convention in 2004. So that was my only experience. And in 2005, 2006, Real-Time Crime Center, then I retired. But in one of my public safety companies that I work for, we developed a facial recognition solution. So shout out to Roger Rodriguez, one of my best friends, retired detective from the facial identification unit within the Real-Time Crime Center, the NYPD, one of the early pioneers with Kenny McKeel in the Real-Time Crime Center, but a subsequent commanding officer of the Real-Time Crime Center who also furthered the facial identification effort within the Real-Time Crime Center. So Ron and Rob are going to talk to Joe Cortizas tomorrow night in episode 60. They're going to delve into recent cases that have resulted in the arrest of individuals who are misidentified using facial recognition. Joe, who is an expert in this field, will shed light on the causes of these errors and exploring why they stem from technological limitations and investigative oversights or a lack of awareness among law enforcement and best practices and regarding facial recognition. The future of policing increasingly relies on advanced technology. Paul, if you want to do another episode on AI and advancing on technology, we can do that. You know, that's my space. That's your space. It's our space. We can get Joe Cortizas. We can get a bunch of people to talk and dive deep into where the future of policing technology is for sure.
Come back any day.
I'm sorry, say again?
I would come back anytime.
Yeah. We're going to get you back. And then we're going to get Morgan Wright. I want to do Ron. What do you think if you're still on? We get Morgan and Paul on the same episode. I don't know if people can handle it. Like, woo! That's a wild ride.
It's a lot.
And that's a compliment. The conversation shifts to potential violations of constitutional rights and the impact on public trust. Join the interactive chat and engaging, thought-provoking discussion that will challenge your perspectives on the role of technology in law enforcement. So yeah, and then every month, well, before I do that, every Monday, Wednesday, Friday, the Finest Unfiltered, John, Eric, and Marlon, Monday, Wednesday, Friday, Fridays roundtables, 8:05 a.m. every week, and then come back for us on Tuesdays, Ron and Rob, every Wednesday nights at 5:05. 5:05 p.m., not a.m. Sorry if I said that. And I screwed up. I was like, a couple of weeks ago, Ron was texting me saying Joe Cortez is coming on, and I fired. Listen, guys, just show up every 8:05, Monday, Wednesday, Friday for the Finest Unfiltered. Show up every Tuesday at 7:05 p.m. for the Ten-Four Tavern, and show up at 5:05 every week on Wednesday. You're about to learn and dive into law enforcement, public safety, great stories, great opinions, great executive perspectives, for sure. With that, we're still promoting. It's 42 episodes in, and we're still promoting Pete's book, The Deadly Path, the Fast and Furious scandal that Pete was a whistleblower on. It's an amazing story. The read is interesting and unbelievable. So get it on Amazon, Google Books, Simon & Schuster, Barnes & Noble. And then you can follow us on X, LinkedIn, Instagram, and Facebook at the Ten-Four Tavern. You can find us, search us. Please follow us, share, like, and subscribe all the channels. And just, Paul came on and he said, you guys got 175,000 subscribers on the Finest Unfiltered channel. Ron Layson and the team has talked internally about the number of views, likes, shares, and stuff. And I got to tell you, my opinion, without any empirical data to support it, I just think that social media suppresses the conversations we're having. That's just my opinion. I won't go too into it. I won't explain
law enforcement, anything pro law enforcement doesn't meet the algorithm's purpose.
That's right. So that means we need everyone listening to like, subscribe, share, and if you're on YouTube, hype. If you get offered the hype button, press the hype button. So let's do it. Anything else? Final thoughts? You can wrap up your show, Paul. Thank you for coming. Awesome episode. And then we'll just talk afterwards to see if there's anything you need me to do afterwards.
Thanks for having me. I go into a lot of taverns, bars around the world, and this one was probably the most fun. Appreciate it.
All right. And then we got some comments. People agree with the suppression and the pushing down of algorithms. I actually I put my own money into, because this is not a money-making venture. So I put, $20 here, $30 here for paid boosts on social media. I did an educational homicide prosecution on Anasiga Nicolosi. $20. I'll be open and transparent. I did $20, $5 a day, and Instagram and Facebook. So that's $40 total out of my pocket. That's beer money, Paul. I know you're disappointed, but that's a couple of beers that I missed on. But I'm a sacrifice guy. I'll make the sacrifice.
You're a giver, Tommy. You're a giver.
I'm a giver. Yep. And people, I'm a lover, not a fighter. I don't know why they think that, but whatever. $40 to boost the post, and they said no, it does not fit our criteria on Facebook and Instagram. And I reread it, and I read it 1,000 times, and I protested it, and I kicked it back to them, and they kept denying the protest. And they suppress public safety law enforcement message. I'm convinced of it. I have no empirical data to support it. It's my opinion. We all know what opinions. Everybody has one, and they also have something else, but I'm just saying what it is.
You can be opinionated and be right at the same time. We talked about that before.
All right. Stay on. We're going to do an outro because we have great music. And then, Paul, you and I will talk, and then we'll wrap up in 5 minutes. God bless everybody. Love everybody. Be safe. Take care of yourself. If you need help, reach out. Don't drink yourself. Don't do it. Don't abuse drugs. If you're in a bad place, reach out. Paul, there's always somebody here to help you.
And stay classy.
That's right. Thanks. Thanks, Paul. Goodbye, everybody.